They mocked her for wasting her last $700 on a rusted, broken trailer. Junk metal on wheels. They laughed. But the moment Elena and her daughter stepped inside, the walls began to whisper secrets no one expected. Hidden compartments, coded ledgers, and a safe locked for decades revealed a story of smuggling, fortune, and forgotten power. Neighbors who once sneered now stand in silence as experts uncover history buried in plain sight. What would drive a single mother to risk everything on a relic? And what truth could be so valuable that strangers tried to buy it before she even knew what she had? Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The auction lot was nothing more than a patch of gravel on the edge of town, hemmed in by sagging wire fencing and banners that had seen too many summers. Rusted pickups lined the perimeter, their owners leaning on doors with coffee-stained cups and amused eyes as each item rolled out for bidding. Elena Morales stood among them, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of a faded denim jacket, trying to ignore the knot tightening in her chest. At 32, with a daughter waiting back at her friend's house, she carried the weight of too many choices that had led her here. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the chill morning air, quick and sharp, rattling off numbers and calling out deals no one wanted. They had brought out old farming tools, kitchen appliances, even a few beaten-down cars, each going for more than she could afford. Elena wasn't here for those things. She was here for what others would ignore, the forgotten pieces, the unsellable. When the trailer was wheeled into view, a few men chuckled openly. It was small, single-axle, the paint flaked away in jagged scars of rust, with patches of bare metal bleeding through. One wheel wobbled as a lot attendant pulled it forward, and its windows, rimmed with dirt, seemed more like vacant eyes than anything habitable. There it is. One man's trash, another's headache, the auctioneer said, and the crowd laughed. No one raised a hand. Elena pressed her lips together, feeling the weight of the $700 folded in her back pocket. It was all she had left after rent, bills, and the slow bleed of part-time work that never covered enough. $700 to her was food, gas, a few weeks of survival. But she couldn't keep bouncing from borrowed couches and rundown apartments that landlords were eager to clear out. She needed something that was hers, no matter how broken. The bidding began at $1,000, then dropped when no one responded. The auctioneer's voice carried a note of irritation as he lowered it to $800. Still, silence. A few people shook their heads. One man muttered, "Not worth the scrap." Elena's heart pounded. She thought of Marisol, her 10-year-old, who had been asking when they would finally have a home again, a place where she could paint on the walls, sleep without packing a bag every few weeks. Elena raised her hand. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. $700. The auctioneer looked at her, half expecting her to back out. $700 once. $700 twice. He scanned the lot. No other hands lifted. Sold. His gavel cracked down on the wooden podium, and just like that, Elena Morales owned a rusted trailer that nobody wanted. The laughter around her was soft but cruel. A man in a grease-stained cap nudged his friend. She just bought herself a coffin on wheels. Another snorted. Ladies wasting her money. Elena didn't respond. She walked toward the trailer, tracing her fingers along the dented metal. The surface was cold, gritty beneath her hand, but it was solid. It was hers. An attendant handed her the paperwork. Thin sheets with scrawled signatures that confirmed the transfer. "You'll need to get it registered," he said with a shrug, as if he didn't expect it to last long enough to matter. She nodded, folded the papers into her jacket, and climbed the creaking steps into the trailer. Inside smelled of rust and old wood, a stale air that had been sealed too long. The linoleum floor curled at the edges, peeling in long strips. Cabinet doors hung unevenly, their hinges rusted through. But Elena noticed the way the walls still held. The frame wasn't as rotten as she expected. Sunlight slanted through cracked blinds, falling on a counter where faint carvings ran along the edge, deliberate lines, not scratches from neglect. She let out a breath, half relief, half fear what she had just committed to. From the outside, the voices of neighbors still carried across the lot, dismissive and mocking. But Elena shut the flimsy door behind her and stood in the dim quiet. letting the silence swallow their laughter. This was more than a gamble. It was her last chance. $700 had bought her the smallest measure of hope, packed inside rust and peeling paint. What lay beneath, she didn't yet know, but something about the weight of the trailer, the strange craftsmanship hidden beneath grime, told her this story wasn't over. She pressed her palm flat against the warped countertop and whispered, "We'll make this work." The trailer rattled down the cracked two-lane road, hitched to an old borrowed pickup that groaned with every mile. Elena kept her hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes forward, refusing to look at her reflection in the side mirror. The trailer swayed like an injured animal limping behind her, its panels catching the afternoon sun and flashing bursts of rust red against the green of the roadside fields. Every bump in the road echoed through the thin walls, reminding her just how fragile her new home really was. She whispered to herself, steadying the knot of nerves in her chest. Just get there, one step at a time. When she turned into the narrow lane that led to the small patch of land she rented on the edge of town, the first heads began to turn. A pair of older women paused their conversation at a garden fence, their eyes following the battered shape rolling behind the truck. One shook her head, the corner of her mouth twisting upward. "Lord help her," she murmured, just loud enough for her friend to hear. The other didn't bother lowering her voice. "That thing belongs in a scrapyard, not a yard. She'll be lucky if it doesn't collapse in the first storm." Farther up the street, a group of teenagers sat slouched on the hood of a rusted sedan. They straightened when the trailer creaked past, laughter spilling from them in quick bursts. One of them lifted a phone, snapping pictures. "Hey, look at that," he called, pointing. She bought herself a tin can, $700 of pure trash. Another added, "Hope she didn't plan on living in it. Even rats wouldn't." The sound of their amusement followed the trailer like a shadow, pressing against Elena's back until her shoulders stiffened. By the time she reached her lot, more neighbors had gathered at windows and porches. Word traveled fast in small places, faster than kindness ever seemed to. Mr. Clayton, the retired mechanic across the road, leaned on his cane and whistled low. "Junk metal on wheels," he said to no one in particular, but loud enough to carry. His wife folded her arms, shaking her head. That poor child of hers, dragged into that wreck. What's she thinking? Elena pretended not to hear, climbing down from the driver's seat, her boots crunching on gravel. Unhitching the trailer was harder with so many eyes on her. She could feel the heat of their stares, the judgment radiating across the yards. Sweat ran down her temple as she wrestled with the latch, her hands trembling more from humiliation than effort. She thought of Marisol, waiting at her friend's house, and pictured the girl's wide eyes lighting up at the sight of something, anything, that belonged to them. That image was the only thing that kept her from breaking under the weight of the moment. Children from a nearby duplex darted closer, circling the trailer like it was some kind of spectacle. One boy tapped the side with his stick, laughing when the metal clanged hollow. "Hear that? It's empty. Bet it falls apart if you kick it hard enough." Their parents didn't call them back, only watched with faint smirks. To them, Elena had become entertainment, a lesson in what desperation looked like when painted in rust and dents. She climbed the 3 steps and pushed open the warped door. The hinges screamed, a long metallic wail that set off another round of laughter from across the street. Inside, the air smelled of dust and damp wood. Elena stood there a moment, letting the noise filter through the thin walls. She could still hear them, muffled but clear enough. She wasted her money. Crazy woman. That's no home, it's a coffin. Elena closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the cool frame of the doorway. Their voices cut deep, sharper because they echoed doubts she already carried. $700 was gone, and in its place she had this, something everyone else saw as ruin. But she straightened her back and exhaled slowly. The walls might be thin, the floor weak, but the space was hers. She stepped inside fully and let the door fall shut, silencing the jeers outside. For the first time in years, even in its ruin, she had keys in her pocket to something no one could take from her. The neighbors could laugh all they wanted. She would endure it, because she had learned long ago that sometimes the ugliest shells carried secrets worth holding on to. The sun was already sinking when Elena brought Marisol to the trailer for the first time. The air was cool, the kind of late evening chill that seeped in through denim and reminded you winter was coming. Marisol held tight to her mother's hand, her small canvas backpack bouncing against her side with each step. She craned her neck to look at the trailer, her eyes narrowing with the kind of honest appraisal only a child could give. "It looks old," she said softly. Elena forced a smile, brushing a stray curl of her daughter's dark hair back from her forehead. "It is old, but it's ours." The key scraped stubbornly against the lock before giving way with a reluctant click. Elena pushed the door open, its hinges groaning like a warning. The stale air rolled out, carrying the smell of dust, rust, and something faintly metallic, as if the trailer itself had been holding its breath for decades. Marisol wrinkled her nose, but she didn't let go of her mother's hand. Together, they stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under their weight, but the trailer did not collapse the way neighbors had predicted. A thin beam of fading daylight cut through the blinds, scattering across the warped linoleum. Elena set her bag down on the counter and exhaled, as if putting it there was enough to stake a claim. "This is home," she said quietly. The words meant more for herself than for Marisol. They began to explore slowly, each step cautious but curious. The cabinets rattled when opened, some hanging loosely from rusted hinges. Marisol pulled open a drawer that resisted at first, then came free with a sudden jerk. Instead of dust and scraps, they found wood. Unexpected, polished wood, dark in tone, carved with tiny lines that swirled in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. Marisol traced the grooves with her finger. "Mom, look, someone carved this." Elena leaned closer, her breath catching. Beneath the chipped paint and years of grime, she could see it too, curves and spirals, a design hidden where no one would bother to look. Not vandalism, not random scratches. Someone had spent hours etching these patterns into what would otherwise have been an ordinary drawer. She ran her thumb over the surface, feeling the faint dip of the carvings. A shiver went through her. "Strange place for decoration," she murmured. As they continued, more details began to reveal themselves. Along the edge of the counter, beneath a layer of peeling laminate, faint lines of the same kind of carving appeared. In the bedroom, Marisol tugged at a panel that looked slightly different from the others. It gave way with a pop, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside lay nothing but dust and a crumpled scrap of yellowed paper, but the discovery itself made Marisol's eyes widen. "It's like the trailer has hiding spots," she whispered. Elena sat down on the corner of the bed frame, its mattress long gone, only the metal skeleton remaining. She rubbed her palms over her jeans, watching her daughter crouch in the dim light, fascinated by what they were uncovering. All day she had carried the weight of doubt, listening to the laughter of neighbors and the echo of her own fear that she had thrown away her last chance. But now, here in the gloom of a place everyone else dismissed, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A spark. They spent the next hour with flashlights, peering into corners, pulling at boards, tapping the floor for hollow sounds. In the back corner, Marisol knelt and tapped against one section of the floor that gave a different tone. "Here," she said, excitement spilling into her voice. Elena knelt beside her, and together they pressed against the board. It shifted slightly, revealing the edge of another hidden compartment. Inside was nothing more than a tarnished spoon and a button, but the fact that it was there at all left them both staring at each other in silence. When night fully settled, Elena found an old blanket from their car and spread it across the floor. They lay side by side, the flashlight set upright, so its beam lit the ceiling in a soft glow. Marisol whispered, "Do you think the person who owned this before us made all those hiding spots for a reason?" Elena turned to look at her daughter's curious eyes, reflecting the light. She didn't have an answer, not yet, but she reached out, brushing her hand through Marisol's hair. "Maybe," she said gently. "Maybe there's more here than anyone ever knew." The wind outside rattled the thin walls, but instead of feeling fear, Elena felt the weight of possibility. The trailer, broken and rusted, had secrets written into its bones. She closed her eyes, listening to Marisol's steady breathing. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe they hadn't just bought junk metal on wheels. Maybe Just maybe they had found beginning of something larger than either of them understood. The morning light crept through the cracked blinds, spilling soft stripes across the trailer's floor. Elena was already awake, sitting on the edge of the metal bed frame, staring at the hollow walls around her. Sleep had been shallow, disturbed by the rattling of loose panels in the wind and the thought of neighbors' laughter echoing through her head. Still, there was a strange calm about waking up inside something she owned, however broken it was. Marisol stirred beside her, bundled in blankets, her hair tangled into a dark halo against a pillow they had brought from the car. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and whispered, "It feels different in the morning." Elena smiled faintly. Everything feels different when the sun's out. She rose and began tugging at a section of peeling wallpaper near the kitchenette, testing the surface with her fingertips. The glue had long since dried to powder, and it came off in brittle flakes. She was thinking about scrubbing, sanding, maybe painting one day, when she heard Marisol's small voice call from the corner. "Mom, come look at this." Her daughter was crouched low near the back wall, her thin fingers pulling at another panel where the wallpaper had bubbled and cracked. Elena knelt beside her, expecting to find more water damage. Instead, what emerged beneath the curling paper was wood, dark and worn smooth, and carved into it were lines that didn't look random at all. At first, they seemed like scratches, but as more wallpaper tore away, shapes began to connect. Circles intersected with triangles, and along the edges ran patterns that repeated in deliberate sequences. Elena ran her hand over the exposed surface, her skin prickling. The marks were old, pressed deep into the grain of the wood, but they hadn't faded completely. "Someone carved these," she said softly. Marisol tilted her head, her eyes narrowed in concentration. But who would do that inside a trailer? It was a fair question. The craftsmanship was far older than the trailer's supposed age. The rusted frame, the mid-century appliances, all spoke of the 1950s or later. Yet these markings seemed older, like something salvaged from another time. Elena pressed her palm flat against the panel, tracing the outline of a spiral that ended in an arrow-like point. It didn't feel like decoration. It felt like instruction. Marisol pulled back more paper, uncovering an entire cluster of symbols near the floor. Some resembled stars, others looked like crude maps or compass points. There was even one shaped like an eye, carved with such precision that it seemed to watch them as they crouched before it. "They don't look random," Marisol whispered. "It's like a secret language." Elena sat back on her heels, trying to steady the unease growing inside her. Maybe someone was hiding something, or maybe they just wanted to leave a mark. She didn't believe her own words. The carvings had intention. They weren't the idle work of a bored owner scratching at the walls. They belonged to someone who wanted them to be found. They spent the next hour peeling away more wallpaper, their fingers raw from tugging at the brittle surface. The deeper they went, the more the patterns revealed themselves. Some overlapped, forming larger designs. One section near the kitchenette showed a perfect circle divided into 4 quadrants, each marked with a different symbol: an arrow, a flame, a wave, and a tree. Marisol traced each one carefully, her brow furrowed. "These look like elements," she said, surprising Elena with the sharpness of her observation. In another corner, they uncovered a row of numbers scratched beneath the wood paneling. The digits were uneven, as if carved quickly, but they followed a sequence that didn't match a date or address. Elena copied them onto a piece of paper, tucking it into her jacket pocket. She didn't know why, but it felt important to keep track. By midday, the air inside the trailer was filled with dust and the faint smell of old glue. Elena leaned against the counter, watching Marisol kneel in front of the eye-shaped carving again. The girl tilted her head, her lips moving silently as if she were trying to speak with it. "Do you think these are clues?" she asked. "Like in a puzzle?" Elena hesitated, caught between protecting her daughter's imagination and admitting what she herself felt. She had seen carvings before in old buildings and abandoned barns. But this was different. The lines were too deliberate, too careful. She crouched down and put her arm around Marisol. "I think someone wanted to be remembered," she said carefully. "And maybe we're the ones who were supposed to find it." The thought lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. Outside, a car door slammed, and faint laughter drifted across the lot from the neighbors. But inside, Elena and Marisol remained crouched before the wall of symbols, dust covering their clothes, eyes fixed on patterns no one else had seen in years. The trailer no longer felt like junk. It felt like a message, waiting for them to learn how to read it. The broom scratched across the linoleum in tired strokes, pushing dust into a growing pile near the door. Elena's arms ached, but she pressed on, determined to clear away the layers of neglect that clung to every surface of the trailer. The morning sun angled through blinds, casting slivers of light that made the dust motes swirl like tiny dancers. Marisol sat cross-legged on a blanket near the corner, drawing in her sketchbook, carefully copying the strange carvings they had uncovered the day before. Every so often, she would glance up at her mother, then back to her paper, her pencil scratching with quiet focus. Elena shifted her broom to the far end of the trailer, sweeping along the narrow walkway that ran between the kitchenette and the wall. That was when she heard a low, hollow thump beneath the bristles. She stopped mid-sweep, her breath catching. The broom rested still against the floor, and for a moment the only sound was Marisol's pencil tapping against the paper. Slowly, Elena pressed the broom down again, sliding it forward. Another hollow thud answered. Her eyes narrowed. She set the broom aside and crouched, running her hand flat across the linoleum. The floorboards were uneven, warped from years of wear, but one section gave a faint echo when she knocked her knuckles against it. Hollow. Her pulse quickened. "Marisol," she called softly. Her daughter looked up, curious, her hair falling into her face. "Come here a second." The girl hopped up and padded across the floor, kneeling beside her mother. Elena tapped the spot again, letting her daughter hear the difference between that hollow sound and the solid thud of the boards around it. Marisol's eyes widened. "It sounds like something's under there," she whispered. Elena nodded, her throat dry. She pressed her palm harder against the board, testing its edges. The floor didn't lift easily, but there was just enough give to suggest it wasn't fixed like the others. The discovery sent a rush of conflicting emotions through her: excitement, fear, doubt. Hidden things rarely meant anything simple. She retrieved a flathead screwdriver from the small box of tools she had brought in from the truck. Kneeling again, she slid the blade into the seam where the boards met. The tool slipped a little, scraping against the wood, but finally found leverage. With a firm twist, the edge of the board lifted, releasing a groan that echoed through the trailer. Dust billowed up, and Elena pulled the plank free, setting it aside carefully. Beneath lay a narrow cavity, no deeper than a hand's length, carved deliberately between the joists. Inside, the dim light revealed only dust and a few scraps of cloth. Elena leaned closer, her heart thudding. Marisol crouched beside her, holding the flashlight they had used the night before. The beam cut through the darkness, and suddenly the hollow space revealed itself more fully. The cloth was not random. It was oiled canvas, folded tightly, once meant to preserve whatever it had been wrapped around. Elena reached in with cautious fingers and lifted the bundle. The canvas disintegrated as she unwrapped it, crumbling into brittle fragments. Inside was nothing of value now, only rusted metal bits that might have once been nails or hinges. Too far gone to tell, but the existence of the hiding place itself was more important than its contents. Someone had built this compartment for a reason. "There might be more," Marisol said, her voice hushed, reverent. She tapped another board nearby, listening to the sound. This one rang solid. The next one, hollow again. Elena's eyes met her daughter's, and they shared a look that needed no words. This wasn't the only hidden space. They spent the next hour tapping, knocking, listening. Most of the boards answered with dull firmness, but here and there, certain sections gave that same hollow reply. Each time they discovered one, Elena marked it with chalk she found in Marisol's art supplies. By the end, 6 separate spots glowed with chalk circles across the trailer floor. Elena sank onto the edge of the bed frame, staring at the marked boards. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. The laughter of the neighbors still rang in her memory. Junk metal on wheels. But sitting here, looking at the evidence of hidden compartments built into this rusted trailer, she knew they had been wrong. This place was not ordinary. It was not random. Someone had designed it with secrets in mind. Marisol sat beside her, holding her sketchbook open to a fresh page. She began sketching the layout of the trailer, marking each hollow space like points on a map. Her small hands moved quickly, her face set in concentration. Elena watched her for a long moment, realizing that her daughter's excitement was brighter than any fear she herself felt. The floor creaked again under her feet, but this time Elena didn't hear it as weakness. She heard it as possibility, as though the old board themselves were whispering reminders that what people dismissed as worthless often carried the deepest stories. The afternoon light slanted low, stretching long shadows to the narrow windows of the trailer. Dust still hung in the air from the hours Elena and Marisol had spent pulling at warped wallpaper and tapping along the floorboards. They had uncovered hollow spaces, carvings etched into walls, but the work left the place feeling even more unsettled, like a body cut open, revealing secrets beneath the skin. Elena set down the screwdriver she had been using and leaned against the counter, rubbing her sore wrists. Marisol was rummaging through the cabinets above the tiny kitchenette, her small frame balanced carefully on a wobbly chair. Most of what she pulled down was useless. Chipped mugs, rusty utensils, and crumpled papers that disintegrated when touched. "Be careful up there," Elena said, glancing up at her daughter. "I am," Marisol replied, her voice muffled as she reached deeper into the cabinet. Her fingers scraped along the back wall, brushing against something wedged flat behind the splintered wood. She pulled it free slowly, dust shaking loose in a cloud. "Mom," she said, her tone suddenly different, soft, almost reverent. "Look." In her hands was a photograph. The edges were frayed, curled with age, and its surface bore the faint sheen of decades-old chemicals. Black and white tones had faded to a sepia gray, but the image was clear enough to make out. A man stood in front of a trailer. This trailer, unmistakably the same. The curve of the wheel well, the placement of the small window, even the dent above the door matched perfectly. But in the photo, the trailer was new, gleaming with paint that reflected sunlight, unmarred by rust. The man looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, broad-shouldered, with suspenders stretched over a collared shirt and work boots planted firmly in the dirt. His hair was combed back neatly, and his face carried the proud half-smile of someone showing off a prized possession. He stood with one hand on the doorframe, the other resting at his hip, as though daring the world to challenge him. At the bottom corner, written in neat script, was a year, 1952. Elena took the photograph from Marisol carefully, afraid it might crumble at her touch. She studied it, her thumb tracing the numbers. This was the same trailer, she murmured, more to herself than to her daughter. Back when it was brand new. Marisol leaned closer, peering at the man's stern eyes, which seemed to look directly through the decades into theirs. "Do you think he built it?" she asked. "Maybe," Elena said quietly. "Or maybe he was just the first one to own it." She turned the photo over. The back was blank except for a faint smudge, as though someone had once pressed their finger there. No names, no notes, nothing to explain who the man was or why he had hidden the photo away. They sat together at the small counter, staring at the image, the silence of the trailer pressed around them, heavy, as though the walls remembered him too. Elena imagined the pride in his stance, the certainty in his posture. This was not someone who saw the trailer as junk. To him, it had been something more, something worth photographing, worth keeping as proof. Why would he hide it? Marisol asked after a while. Elena shook her head. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it just got lost back there. But even as she spoke, doubt lingered. The carvings in the walls, the hollow compartments, and now this photograph. All of it suggested intention. Someone had used the trailer for more than just living. Someone had left pieces of themselves behind, waiting to be found. She set the photo gently on the counter, smoothing it flat. In the dim light, the man's figure looked almost ghostly, blurred at the edges but solid enough to leave an impression. Elena thought of the neighbors' laughter, of their mockery when she hauled the rusted frame down the road. To them, it was nothing but a wreck. Yet here was proof that once, long ago, it had been someone's pride, perhaps even someone's livelihood. Marisol picked up her pencil and began sketching the photograph into her notebook. copying the man's strong posture and the clean lines of the trailer as it once was. Her tongue poked from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Elena watched her, feeling a swell of something she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. Hope. The man in the picture had stood in the same doorway they now walked through, his eyes alive with belief. Maybe, just maybe, that belief hadn't died with him. As night crept in and the trailer's thin walls cooled, Elena tucked the photo carefully into her jacket pocket. She wanted it close, not hidden away again. When they finally lay down on their blankets, the sound of the wind rattling against the rusted siding, Elena held the photo in her hands a long time before letting her eyes close. She whispered into the darkness, "Who were you?" But the only answer was the creak of the boards beneath them and the silent gaze of a man frozen in 1952, guarding his trailer from across time. The trailer smelled faintly of rust and burnt dust, the kind of air that clung to places left behind too long. Elena was cleaning near the kitchenette, her sleeves rolled up, sweat dampening her brow from the work of prying open swollen cabinets and wiping years of grime from counters that had once been smooth. Marisol sat nearby, swinging her legs on the edge of a chair, sketching the carvings they had found in her notebook with neat, careful strokes. Every so often she would glance up, curious, waiting for her mother to unearth something else hidden in the walls or floor. The stove sat at the far end of the counter, its surface dull with rust and streaked with brown where years of moisture had eaten at the metal. The dials were stiff, barely turning, and when Elena gripped the handle of the oven door to pull it open, it resisted her with a stubbornness that felt deliberate. She yanked harder. Nothing. The door rattled in its frame, but did not budge. "Great," she muttered, pushing hair from her face. "Even the stove doesn't work." She braced her knee against the cabinet and pulled again with both hands, her arms straining. The door held tight, refusing to give. Marisol looked up from her sketchbook. "Is it stuck?" More like welded shut, Elena said, stepping back. She tapped the door with her knuckles. The sound was off, not the hollow ring of an empty oven, but something thicker, heavier. She frowned and tapped again, then along the edges of the metal. Each knock answered differently, as though parts of it had been reinforced. Marisol hopped down and crouched beside her. "Maybe it's supposed to be like that," she suggested. Her small fingers brushed the seam where the door met the frame. "Look, it doesn't even line up right, like it's not real." Elena leaned closer, following her daughter's observation. The seam wasn't quite straight. The metal edges fitted together with odd precision. She knelt and tried pressing along the corners. To her surprise, one section gave slightly under her palm, as if on a spring. She pressed again, harder this time. A faint click echoed inside. Her pulse quickened. She tugged the handle once more, and this time the door shifted, but not outward. It slid inward half an inch, then dropped forward with smooth motion that felt engineered rather than accidental. Dust spilled into the air as the hidden mechanism released, the door swinging open with a weighty groan. Inside was no oven. The chamber was divided by steel walls, fitted carefully to disguise its true purpose. A shallow compartment ran across the bottom, lined with tarnished metal. At its center sat a small iron box, bolted to the floor of the chamber. Elena reached in, her fingers brushing the cool surface, and pulled gently. The box resisted, locked in place. Marisol's eyes widened, the beam of the flashlight in her hand catching the sharp lines of the compartment. "It's a lockbox," she whispered. "They made the stove into a hiding place." Elena ran her fingers along the sides of the iron box, searching for a latch or keyhole. There, near the corner, she found it, a small opening shaped like a star. She sat back on her heels, remembering the strange drawer they had discovered earlier, the one with a carved star at its edge. It hadn't opened properly either. Could the two be connected? Her heart pounded as she considered the implications. This wasn't just a rusty trailer cobbled together with salvaged parts. Someone had designed it carefully, carving symbols into its walls, hiding compartments beneath its floor, disguising safes as kitchen appliances. Every piece seemed woven into a larger puzzle, one that demanded patience and intelligence to solve. She met Marisol's eager eyes. "Someone built this to keep something safe," she said. "What do you think is inside?" Marisol asked, crouching close to peer into the compartment. Elena shook her head slowly. I don't know, but whatever it is, they didn't want anyone to find it easily. They didn't force the lockbox open that night. Without the right key, it was impossible, and Elena didn't want to risk breaking it and losing whatever might be hidden inside. Instead, she closed the stove carefully, pressing the corner again until the mechanism clicked and the door sealed shut as if it had never been opened. She wiped her hands on her jeans, staring at it with new eyes. Marisol returned to her sketchbook, her pencil moving quickly as she drew the outline of the stove and the secret compartment they had uncovered. Elena stood quietly in the narrow space, the weight of discovery pressing down on her chest. The laughter of neighbors outside, the doubts that had followed her since the auction, all of it seemed distant now. The trailer had been called junk, but junk didn't hold puzzles built into its bones. Junk didn't guard secrets behind oven doors. That night, as they lay side by side under their blankets, Elena's thoughts drifted back to the iron box, locked and waiting. She closed her eyes, but the image of the star-shaped keyhole lingered in her mind, burning brighter than sleep. Whatever was hidden inside this trailer, it was only just beginning to reveal itself. The discovery came late in the evening, when the air inside the trailer had grown heavy with dust and the faint metallic scent of rust. Elena was determined to clear out the smallest of the cabinets, the one wedged beside the refrigerator that had resisted every attempt she made earlier in the day. She tugged at it again, jostling the swollen one until finally the back panel gave a reluctant crack and shifted slightly inward. Dust drifted down in a thin veil, and behind the broken plank, she saw fabric, something wrapped tight in faded cloth. Her breath caught. She reached in, fingers brushing against the coarse bundle, and pulled it free. It was heavier than it looked, wrapped with string that crumbled at her touch. Marisol, who had been sketching in her notebook on the floor, scrambled over, her eyes shining. What is it, Mom? Elena carried the bundle to the counter and laid it gently down. With cautious fingers, she began peeling back the cloth. Dust coated her hands, and an old scent of mildew rose up, but what emerged beneath the folds made her heart race. Bundles of letters, tied together with strips of brittle ribbon, filled the bundle. Each envelope bore handwriting, neat and careful, though faded with age. The paper had yellowed, but most were intact, sealed tight, never opened, never sent. Marisol leaned closer, almost whispering, "Letters. Why would someone hide letters?" Elena slid one free, the ribbon breaking apart in her hands. She held the envelope up to the light. The address was written clearly, though smudged at the edges. A woman's name, repeated over and over across the bundles, each directed to towns scattered across state lines. She carefully broke the seal of one and pulled the letter from inside. The ink was still legible, though faded to a soft brown. She began to read aloud, her voice unsteady at first. The words were personal, almost confessional. The man, she assumed it was the same one from the photograph, wrote to someone he called Clara. His tone was warm but urgent, describing trips across highways and back roads, places where he stopped to rest, and people he couldn't trust. He wrote of packages tucked away in the trailer, of meetings at night in empty lots, of careful exchanges that had to go unnoticed. Elena stopped, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. She read silently now, scanning phrases that leapt out at her. "I can't tell you where I've been, only that I must keep moving. And asterisk, this trailer isn't just mine. It carries more than people would ever guess." Asterisk. Marisol's eyes were wide, her voice barely audible. Was he smuggling something? Elena didn't answer right away. She placed the first letter aside and opened another. This one was dated months later, but the handwriting remained the same. Again, the words spoke of routes across the country, of men who asked too many questions, of the need to hide things in places no one would think to look. The letters hinted at danger but never named it outright, as though the writer feared the letters might one day fall into the wrong hands. She opened a third, then a fourth. Each one was different, but they all carried the same theme: long journeys, hidden goods, and a growing sense of paranoia. Yet none of them had ever been sent. The stamps remained unmarked, the envelopes sealed, tucked away in the dark of a trailer cabinet for decades. Elena pressed her hand against her forehead, tried to absorb the weight of what they were uncovering. Whoever this man was, He hadn't been an ordinary traveler. The carvings in the walls, the compartments beneath the floorboards, the lockbox stove, all began to take shape. The trailer had been used as more than just a home. It had been a vessel, carrying secrets across state lines, secrets the owner never had the courage or chance to confess to the woman he wrote to. Marisol touched one of the bundles gently. Maybe Clara never got them. Maybe she never even knew. Elena folded the letter back into its envelope and set it down. Her daughter's words stung with truth. These letters had been meant for someone, yet for reasons she could only guess, they had never left this place. Hidden away, like the man himself had been trying to vanish while leaving behind fragments of his story. The sound of the wind outside rattled the thin walls, but inside the trailer, the silence grew heavier. Elena looked down at the bundles, dozens of letters bound together in neat stacks. They were more than scraps of paper. They were testimony, evidence of a life lived in secrecy, of someone who had used this same trailer for purposes no one in their small town could have imagined. As she stacked them carefully back on the counter, Elena's chest tightened with the knowledge that she was inheriting more than just rust and wood. She was inheriting someone's unfinished story, and in that story, there were still questions that demanded answers. The bedroom of the trailer was little more than a narrow alcove, a sagging frame where a mattress had once rested and a row of drawers pressed against the wall beneath a single small window. Dust lay thick over everything, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air, clinging to the wooden surfaces that had been neglected for decades. Elena had been focusing on the letters they had uncovered earlier, sorting them carefully into bundles, when she heard her daughter's voice from the other end of the trailer. "Mom, come here," Marisol called, her tone quick, excited. Elena wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped toward the bedroom. She found Marisol crouched low, her knees bent and her fingers tugging at one of the drawers in the built-in cabinet. Most of them had opened with some resistance, revealing little more than dirt and scraps of paper. But this one refused to budge. Marisol glanced up at her mother, determination flashing in her eyes. "It's stuck, but I think it's not like the others." Elena knelt beside her and gave the drawer a pull. It shifted slightly, only an inch or so, before catching against something inside. She pulled again, harder this time, but it wouldn't release. She frowned and bent closer, examining the narrow seam along the edge where the drawer met the frame. There, half hidden beneath dust and shadows, was a small indentation, shaped with deliberate precision. She brushed her fingers over it, clearing away the grime. The hollow was no larger than a coin, but its outline was unmistakable. A star, 5-pointed and carefully carved. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. "It needs a key," she murmured, half to herself. Marisol leaned in close, her eyes wide. "A star key," she whispered. She traced the outline with one finger, then sat back on her heels. "Like the stove?" she added quickly, her mind leaping ahead. Elena remembered the iron lockbox hidden inside the oven, the star-shaped keyhole that had taunted her with its silence. She felt a shiver ripple through her. The same symbol, here again. Whoever had built this trailer had made no random choices. Every compartment, every hidden panel, every carving meant something. And now here was another piece of the puzzle waiting for the missing key. She tugged at the drawer one more time, frustration edging into her voice. "It won't open without it." Marisol looked around the small bedroom as though expecting the key to reveal itself on the spot. She searched the floor, peered under the bed frame, even tapped along the walls with her small hands, listening for hollow spots. But nothing gave. Elena stood slowly, running her palm over the top of the cabinet, then pressing her fingers into the seams along the wall. The trailer's builders had been clever. They wouldn't have left such a mechanism unguarded, but they also wouldn't have placed the key somewhere obvious. Marisol returned to the star-shaped indentation, staring at it with the seriousness of someone much older than 10. "What do you think is in there?" she asked softly. Elena exhaled, steadying her nerves. Something worth hiding, something they wanted safe. She paused and added, "and maybe connected to what's inside the stove." They both stood in silence for a long moment, the trailer creaking faintly around them as the wind shifted outside. The neighbors' voices carried from beyond the thin walls, muffled but dismissive as ever. Yet inside this narrow bedroom, it felt like a different world entirely. The hidden drawer, the star keyhole, the lockbox stove, the letters of a man who hinted at secrets across state lines. It all seemed part of the same story, a story that was pulling them deeper with every discovery. Elena placed a hand on Marisol's shoulder. "We'll find it," she said firmly. "Whoever left this for us made sure it would only open when the right piece was in place." Marisol nodded, determination setting in. She went back to her sketchbook later that evening, drawing the outline of the star-shaped keyhole with careful precision, adding it to her growing collection of symbols and compartments. Elena watched her daughter's quiet concentration, the way her pencil moved with confidence, and felt both pride and unease. Pride because Marisol's sharp mind and persistence had brought them this far. Unease because the further they went, the clearer it became that this trailer had not been built for ordinary living. It had been designed for secrets, and those secrets had not wanted to be found. When the lights dimmed and they lay together under their blankets, Elena closed her eyes and pictured the star-shaped hollow again. She imagined a key, heavy and cold, turning in the lock with a sound that would echo through the hollow frame of the trailer. She imagined what might be inside, a diary, a map, money, or something stranger. Whatever it was, it waited behind that drawer, locked away until the day the missing key returned to the place it belonged. The following morning, the sky hung low and gray, the kind of weather that carried with it a heaviness even before the rain began. Elena was outside, sweeping the loose gravel away from the wheels of the trailer, trying to make the patch of land look less like a dumping ground and more like a home. She had been at it for nearly an hour when she felt someone watching her. Turning, she saw an older man standing at the edge of his property, his arms folded across his chest. His frame was still tall, though age had bent his shoulders slightly, and the lines etched into his face spoke of long highways and years spent under the sun. It was Mr. Harlan, a retired trucker who had lived in the neighborhood longer than most of the houses had been standing. He was known for his silence, a man who spoke little but saw everything. Elena wiped her hands on her jeans and gave him a cautious nod. "Morning." He didn't answer at once. His gaze lingered on the trailer, eyes narrowing as though he were looking past its rust and dents, straight through to the secrets inside. Finally, he stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. His voice, when he spoke, was low and gravelly, the kind of voice shaped by years of diesel fumes and roadside coffee. "That trailer," he said slowly, "ain't just some old scrap you picked up cheap. It's been through things better left alone." Elena stiffened. She gripped the broom handle tighter, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What do you mean by that?" Harlan's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the trailer. "I've seen it before. Long time ago. Back when I was still running routes across state lines. Word was, a rig like that didn't just carry families looking for a place to sleep. It carried things folks didn't want found. Things that had lawmen sniffing around one week, and men with darker intentions sniffing the next." Marisol had stepped outside quietly and now stood half hidden behind her mother, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Harlan noticed her and softened his tone slightly, though his words lost none of their weight. "You think it's just rust and rot, but trailers like that, they got a memory. You can paint it over, scrub it clean, but the walls remember." Elena felt her stomach tighten. She thought of the carved symbols, the hollow compartments, the photograph of the proud man in 1952, and the bundles of letters never sent. Each piece had unsettled her in its own way. But hearing Harlan's warning, those fragments seemed to knit together into something larger. She crossed her arms, tried to push back against his words. Whatever it was used for, that was decades ago. It's just a place now. A place for me and my daughter. Harlan shook his head, the brim of his cap shadowing his eyes. Places don't shed their past so easy. Not ones like that. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I remember hearing stories. Drivers who claimed they saw it pulled off the side of highways in the dead of night. Men loading things into its belly that weren't meant to see daylight. Some said money. Others said papers. A few even whispered about things far worse. But no one ever talked too loud. Not if they wanted to keep on driving. Marisol's fingers tightened around her sketchbook. Why would someone hide things in trailer? she asked, her voice small but clear. Harlan's gaze softened for just a moment as he looked at her, because a trailer can go anywhere. No one looks twice at a family on the road. But what's inside, that's another story. He straightened, his eyes shifting back to Elena. Be careful. Some things ain't meant to be dug up. And once you stir them, you can't put them back to sleep. The weight of his words lingered long after he walked back to his yard, his boots slow but steady. Elena stood still, her grip on the broom slackening until it slipped from her hand. She looked at the trailer, its rusted frame gleaming faintly under the dull sky. She remembered the letter speaking of smuggling, the star-shaped keyhole that refused to open, and the stove designed as a lockbox, all of it pressed against her chest with new heaviness. Marisol looked up at her, her eyes wide. Mom, do you think he's right? Elena crouched and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. She forced a small smile, though unease flickered in her eyes. I don't know, she admitted softly, but we're already inside this now. Whatever its past is, it's tied to us too. They stood there together in the silence, the wind rising around them. The trailer loomed behind them like a figure that refused to be forgotten, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Harlan's warning was not just about the past. It was about what was still waiting to be found. The refrigerator stood like a relic from another time. Its enamel once white, but now yellow with age, streaked in places with rust that crawled upward from the base. It hadn't worked in years. Elena doubted it had even been plugged in since the trailer was abandoned, but it took up precious space in the cramped kitchenette. She decided it had to be checked before they could think about removing it. Pulling it forward was a struggle. The legs scraped loudly against the floor, sending a shiver through the boards, and Marisol covered her ears at the noise. Finally, the fridge lurched outward, revealing a narrow strip of wall and a nest of dust and grit that had been hidden for decades. Elena crouched down, coughing into her sleeve as she began to clear the debris. Something about the wall looked strange, bulged in a way that didn't match the rest of the trailer's construction. She pressed her palm against it and felt an odd give, as if there was something soft behind the thin paneling. She took the screwdriver again and pried at the seam. With a faint rip, the insulation beneath the wall gave way, revealing a hidden cavity stuffed with brittle, fibrous material. Her hand brushed deeper, and her fingers touched something different, something stiff. She pulled gently, and a folded sheet came free, its edges torn and flaking with age. She spread it carefully across the counter. It wasn't paper in the ordinary sense. It felt thicker, almost like parchment. The ink was faded, smudged by time, but the markings were still visible. A map, hand-drawn, the lines uneven but confident, stretching across what seemed to be state routes and highways. Certain towns were circled, others marked with small symbols. A triangle here, a spiral there, a series of cross lines along the edge. Marisol climbed onto the counter beside her, leaning over the sheet with wide eyes. "It looks like treasure," she whispered, her voice full of awe. She pointed to one of the circles near the edge. "What do you think that means?" Elena traced a route with her finger, recognizing names of places miles away, towns she had only passed on old road trips, forgotten stops along endless highways. But the map was not ordinary. It wasn't meant for travelers seeking the fastest route. It seemed coded personal, each mark carrying meaning only to the one who had drawn it. The symbols matched nothing she knew, but some echoed what they had seen carved into the trailer's walls. The spirals, the compass-like shapes, even the star appeared again. Her chest tightened. The man from the photograph had stood so proudly by this trailer, and the letters they had found hinted at journeys filled with secrecy. Now here was proof. He hadn't just written about routes. He had drawn them, preserved them, and hidden them in the very bones of the trailer. Marisol leaned closer, running her finger along one jagged line. Maybe this is where he went. Maybe this shows where he hid things. She grabbed her notebook and began copying the shapes, carefully sketching each symbol, so they wouldn't lose track if the fragile map crumbled further. Elena folded her arms, staring at the fragment. "It's possible," she said quietly. But whatever it meant, he didn't want anyone else to find it. She thought of Mr. Harlan's warning the day before, about the trailer carrying things better left alone. Maybe this was part of what he had heard whispered on long nights at truck stops. Still, the map had a pull, undeniable and magnetic. Elena felt it as strongly as Marisol did, a sense that answers were scattered along those routes, waiting in places most people had long forgotten. Each symbol begged to be decoded. Each circled town, carrying a story that hadn't been told. She pressed her hands flat on the counter, leaning over the faded ink. Whoever had drawn this map had lived in the constant tension between movement and secrecy. He had built this trailer not as a simple shelter, but as a vessel of hidden things, a companion on roads filled with dangers that only he understood. And now, decades later, Elena and her daughter were left staring at his blueprint of shadows. The sound of the refrigerator settling back into place jolted her from her thoughts. The old metal groaned, as though reminding them of its weight. Elena quickly folded the fragment, sliding it into the pages of Marisol's sketchbook for safekeeping. For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence at the counter, listening to the faint whistle of wind slipping through cracks in the trailer's walls. Outside, neighbors might still see only rust and decay, but inside, Elena and Marisol knew differently. This place held a map not just of roads, but of secrets, of journeys that carried meaning beyond ordinary travel. Elena brushed the dust from her hands and looked at her daughter. "We're only just beginning to understand what we've stepped into," she said quietly. Marisol nodded, her eyes never leaving the fragile map, as if she were already trying to follow the routes in her mind. The storm rolled in faster than Elena expected, dark clouds gathering over the horizon until the sky was heavy and bruised. By evening, the first drops of rain tapped against the thin metal roof of the trailer. Faint at first, then building into a steady drum that filled the rooms with its restless rhythm. Elena had always hated the sound of rain in places that leaked. It was less a comfort and more a reminder of vulnerability, of roofs that couldn't hold and walls too thin to keep out the world. She tucked Marisol beneath a blanket, lighting the small lantern they kept on the counter as the electricity flickered in and out. Before long, the leaks began. Water slipped through seams in the roof, first in tiny rivulets and then in sharper streams that splattered onto the floor. Elena rushed to set out bowls and pans, her movements hurried, shoulders tense. One leak dripped persistently over the corner of the bedroom, staining the ceiling until the old paint gave way and dropped in chunks. She cursed under her breath, climbing onto the bed frame to push at the swollen plaster. Her fingers met softwood, warped from years of hidden water damage. The rain hammered harder, and then it happened. The roof groaned, the rust giving way with sharp crack as a thin panel broke open. A cascade of water spilled down, drenching her sleeve. Elena hissed at the cold, stepping back. She was about to fetch another pan when something slid loose from the ceiling and fell at her feet. It wasn't plaster. It wasn't wood. It was an envelope, thick, yellow with age, but sealed tight with a wax stamp that had not broken in all the decades it had been hidden. The symbol pressed into the wax was faint, blurred from time, but still recognizable. A 5-pointed star, the same shape that had haunted them in carvings and in the locked compartments. Marisol gasped, rushing forward. "Mom, look!" She pointed at the envelope, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's like the drawer and the stove." Elena bent down and picked it up carefully, her hands wet from the rain. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, the paper stiff but intact. She turned it over slowly, studying the seal, her mind racing. For years, it had been lodged above the ceiling, safe from curious eyes, until the storm forced it into the open. Her heart pounded as she carried it into the main room, setting it on the counter under the glow of the lantern. Marisol hovered beside her, leaning so close that her hair brushed against her mother's shoulder. Together they stared at it, neither speaking, both aware that whatever was inside might change everything they thought they knew about the trailer. Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted to break the seal immediately, to tear it open and release the truth inside. But another part of her resisted, feeling the weight of Mr. Harlan's warning lingering in the back of her mind. Things better left alone. She brushed her thumb over the wax and drew in a steady breath. Finally, she slid her fingernail beneath the edge. The wax cracked with a soft snap, the sound loud in the silence of the storm. She peeled it away, the seal breaking after decades of keeping it secret. Slowly, she unfolded the envelope and slid the contents free. Inside was a folded sheet of parchment-like paper. Its ink faded but still legible. The writing matched the letters they found earlier, the same neat, deliberate hand. But unlike those unsent confessions, this message was not to Clara, not to any loved one. It was instructions, routes written in hurried lines, lists of drop points, coded references to exchanges made at forgotten gas stations and diners along highways long since rerouted. Symbols lined the margins, spirals, stars, triangles, all of them familiar now from the walls and the map. At the bottom, one line stood out, written darker than the rest, as though the pen had pressed harder into the paper. Asterisk. If found, follow only with the key. Without it, the path is death. Asterisk. Elena felt her stomach twist as she read the words aloud. Marisol's face paled, but her eyes shone with a strange mix of fear and fascination that had followed every discovery they'd made. The trailer was no longer just a shelter. It was a cipher, each piece leading to another, every compartment tied to something larger than themselves. Outside, the rain thundered against the roof, but inside the trailer the air felt different, heavier. Elena folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it carefully on the counter. She could almost feel the man from the photograph standing there with them, his presence pressed into every corner of the space. Marisol clutched her sketchbook, already beginning to draw the seal, the map, the lines of code. Elena watched her daughter's determination and wondered if the trailer had found them for a reason. The envelope had waited decades, untouched, hidden above their heads until the storm tore it free. Now it was theirs, and with it came the weight of secrets that no storm could wash away. The trailer had grown quieter in the days since the storm. The dripping patch for now with tarps Elena had fastened across the roof. The smell of damp would still lingered, but the heavy rains had passed, leaving behind a gray calm that pressed down on the small neighborhood. Inside, life had taken on a strange rhythm. Every evening, Elena found herself drawn back to the letters, the sealed envelope, and the map fragment, rereading and studying them as if repetition might force the puzzle to reveal its secret. But while she wrestled with fatigue and unease, Marisol approached the mysteries differently. The girl had taken to sitting cross-legged on the floor with her sketchbook spread wide across her knees. Her small hands moved with a steadiness that belonged to someone older, her pencil scratching as she carefully copied each symbol they uncovered. The spirals carved into the walls, the star-shaped keyhole, the triangles inked on the map, even the lines on the envelope. All of it found its way into her book. She did not just trace them. She redrew them again and again, arranging them in rows, flipping them upside down, combining them into patterns that made sense only to her. Elena would watch in the counter, cleaning or folding their few belongings, while her daughter muttered softly under her breath, whispering the shapes as if they were letters of a forgotten alphabet. Marisol's brow furrowed in concentration, her lips pursed in thought. She would pause sometimes, tilt her head, and add arrows between two symbols, or draw the same image 3 times with tiny variations. One evening, Elena crouched beside her. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" she asked gently. Marisol looked up, her eyes bright, cheeks smudged faintly with graphite. "Because they fit together," she said quickly. "You just can't see it yet. Look." She flipped back through the pages, showing her mother rows of repeated images. The spiral keeps showing up near the star, on the map, in the carvings, even on the envelope. And the triangle? It's almost always next to lines, like roads. What if it means turn or crossing? Elena blinked, surprised at the sharpness of her daughter's observation. She took the notebook in her hands, tracing the pencil marks. "You think it's a code?" Marisol nodded eagerly. A code or a language. Like they wanted only the right people to understand. Maybe it's a way to find things. The words unsettled Elena more than she wanted to admit. She thought of Harlan's warning, of the hidden compartments built into every corner of the trailer. The man who had owned this place before them hadn't trusted the world with his secrets. Yet here was her daughter, piecing them together as if solving a riddle meant for her alone. Days slipped into this strange new routine. In the mornings, Elena worked to patch what she could of the trailer, hauling out broken furniture and scrubbing away mildew. In the afternoons, Marisol filled page after page of her notebook, her pencil worn down to stubs. She taped sheets of paper to the wall, arranging symbols side by side until the walls themselves seemed to whisper with a strange language. She began noticing connections her mother had overlooked. That some of the numbers scratched into the walls matched certain places on the map, that the carved eye always appeared near compartments, that the compass-like medallion they had found aligned with for repeating signs. At night, when they lay under their blankets, Marisol would whisper her discoveries. "The spiral means safe," she would say, or "The star's the key, Mom. Everything circles back to the star." Her voice carried such certainty that Elena found herself half believing, even as her adult mind urged caution. One evening, Marisol brought her sketchbook to the counter where the letters still lay in their bundles. She opened one, laying it beside her drawings, and pointed to the faint marks in the margins. Tiny, almost invisible shapes the man had drawn between lines of writing. "See," she said, her eyes alight. He was writing with two voices, one for Clara and one for the ones who knew the code. Elena's throat tightened as she leaned over the letters. The symbols were faint, so faint she had overlooked them entirely, dismissing them as smudges. But now, through Marisol's careful eye, they emerged as deliberate marks. She reached out and cupped her daughter's cheek, brushing away the smear of pencil. "You're seeing what no one else saw," she whispered. Marisol only smiled, flipping the book closed against her chest. I think he wanted someone to figure it out. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, and the wind whistled softly through cracks in the walls. She stared at the ceiling where the sealed envelope had once been hidden, her mind turning over the patterns her daughter had drawn. Perhaps it was imagination. Perhaps it was coincidence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the trailer had been waiting, that its secrets were unfolding only because Marisol had the eyes to see what others had missed. And in that thought, a flicker of fear grew alongside pride. Because whatever this puzzle led to, it was pulling her daughter deeper into a story neither of them could yet understand. The knock came in the late afternoon, sharp and deliberate against the flimsy trailer door. Elena stiffened where she stood, her hands still dusted with flour from kneading dough on the counter. Visitors were rare, especially here. The neighbors didn't bother knocking. They called from their porches or muttered their opinions loud enough for the wind to carry. This sound was different, crisp, businesslike, a demand rather than request. Marisol looked up from her sketchbook, eyes wide. She whispered, "Who is it, Mom?" Elena wiped her hands quickly on a rag, her heart tightening with unease. She crossed a narrow space and pulled the door open. Standing there was a woman who looked out of place against the gravel lot and rusted siding. She wore a dark tailored coat, pressed slacks, and polished shoes that had never touched mud. Her hair was pinned neatly, not a strand out of place, and her eyes, cool and steady, moved past Elena into the trailer before settling back on her. "Mrs. Morales?" the woman asked, her voice smooth, professional. Elena hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes." The woman's lips curved into a faint smile. "My name isn't important. What matters is the offer I'm prepared to make you." She reached into a leather handbag and pulled out a checkbook, the gesture confident, as if she were accustomed to deals closing the moment she spoke. "I'd like to purchase this trailer from you. I can write the check today, $15,000. The number landed in the cramped space like a thunderclap. Elena blinked, struggling to process it. 15,000. More money than she had seen in one place in years. Enough to pay debts, to rent a proper house, to give Marisol something resembling stability. She felt her throat tighten, the image of fresh groceries and solid walls flashing before her eyes. But then her gaze shifted to the woman again, to the way her eyes scanned the trailer with a precision that didn't belong to someone making a casual offer. She wasn't looking at rust or at leaks. She was looking for something specific. Elena steadied her voice. "Why would you want this trailer?" The woman didn't flinch. "I have an interest in antiques, and I know a valuable structure when I see one. It may look worn down, but pieces like this have a certain history. I'm prepared to take it off your hands and save you the trouble of repairs." She opened the checkbook with a practiced hand, pen poised. 15,000. Right now. Marisol had come to stand beside her mother, her small hand clutching Elena's sleeve. She looked up, her brow furrowed. "Mom, no." she whispered urgently, though the woman's polished expression didn't falter. Elena placed a hand gently over her daughter's, then turned back to the stranger. You haven't even asked to see the inside. For the first time, the woman hesitated. Her smile remained, but her eyes flickered, just for an instant, betraying something beneath the calm. That won't be necessary. I already know what's here. The word sent a chill down Elena's spine. She gripped the edge of the doorframe, steadying herself. What do you mean? You already know? The woman closed the checkbook with a snap, her tone never losing its composure. Let's just say I've been aware of this trailer for some time. It doesn't belong on this lot. It doesn't belong to you. But I can make this easy. You walk away richer, and no one asks questions. Elena's instinct screamed against the smoothness of the offer. $15,000 was too precise, too practiced. Not a negotiation, but a lure. She thought of the letters hidden in the cabinets, the sealed envelope from the ceiling, the coded map tucked into Marisol's sketchbook. Secrets were buried in these walls, and this woman knew it. She straightened her shoulders, her voice firm. It's not for sale. The woman's smile thinned, though she did not argue. She tucked the checkbook back into her bag with calm efficiency. You may regret that decision, she said softly, almost kindly, as if she were offering advice instead of a threat. Then she turned, her heels clicking against the gravel, and walked back toward a black car idling at the edge of the street. Elena shut the door, her hand trembling against the handle. The silence inside the trailer felt heavier than before. Marisol looked up at her, eyes wide with both fear and triumph. She knew Mom. She knew about the trailer. Elena nodded, pulling her daughter close. Her chest still ached with the weight of temptation, but the unease in her gut was stronger. The woman had not come for the trailer as a curiosity. She had come for its secrets. And now Elena understood more clearly than ever. What they'd uncovered inside was no accident. It was something powerful enough to draw strangers with checkbooks and warnings to their door, and the choice to refuse had tied them even deeper to the story the trailer carried. After the woman left, silence settled inside the trailer, thick and uneasy. Elena stood with her back against the door, her palms still pressed to the wood, as if to keep the world out. She could hear the fading hum of the car engine outside, then nothing but the whisper of the wind moving through the gaps in the siding. Marisol sat on the edge of the bed frame, clutching her sketchbook tight to her chest, her wide eyes fixed on her mother. She knew Mom. The girl said again, her voice hushed, as though speaking too loudly might summon the stranger back. Elena finally lowered her hand, her pulse still thudding hard in her ears. She crossed the room and sat beside her daughter, pulling her close. I know, she murmured. That woman didn't just happen by. She came here because of this trailer. She knew it was before she ever knocked. Marisol flipped open her sketchbook, her small hands trembling. She pointed to the page where she had copied the star-shaped keyhole, the spirals, the triangles, the strange symbols that repeated like whispers throughout the trailer. She wanted this, she said firmly. Not the trailer. What's inside it? Elena stroked her daughter's hair, her mind racing. $15,000. It would have solved everything in an instant. The debt, the constant worry about food, the fear of not being able to provide. But the offer had been too clean, too practiced. It hadn't been a neighbor with a passing interest or a collector with a sentimental eye. It had been a woman who already knew there was more buried in these walls than anyone else suspected. That meant others might know too. She rose and moved to the counter, picking up the bundle of letters again. Her hands trembled as she sifted through them, reading fragments of lines she had already memorized. I must keep moving. And asterisk, this trailer isn't just mine. It carries more than people would ever guess. Asterisk, the words struck differently now. They weren't just the confessions of a man to someone he loved. They were warnings. Warnings about what he had chosen to carry and what he had chosen to hide. Elena looked around the small space with new eyes. The carved symbols, the hidden compartments, the lockbox stove, the sealed envelope. They were not accidents, not quirks of a cautious man. They were a system deliberate and careful. And the stranger at her door had known about it. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't pretended to negotiate. She had come with the certainty of someone who had been waiting for the trailer to resurface. The thought left a cold weight in Elena's stomach. If one person had found them, others could too. Perhaps they were already watching. The memory of the woman's words, asterisk, it doesn't belong to you, asterisk, echoed in her mind like a threat. Marisol sensed her unease. She climbed down from the bed and joined her at the counter, opening the sketchbook again. "We can figure out before they do," she said, her young voice steady in a way that startled Elena. The man who made all this wanted someone to find it. Why else would he leave all these clues? Elena wanted to believe her, but she also knew secrets of this size came with danger. Mr. Harlan's warning returned to her. Some things were better left alone. Yet it was too late for that. The trailer had already revealed too much. As dusk fell, Elena stood at the window, watching the quiet street. Neighbors moved in and out of their homes, pretending not to stare at her rusted trailer, pretending not to whisper about her. But she was no longer listening to them. She was listening for the sound of engines, for footsteps that didn't belong, for another knock on the door. She turned back to her daughter, who sat at the table drawing lines that connected symbols and patterns Elena couldn't yet understand. Marisol's determination burned brightly, as if she felt chosen for task. Elena envied that certainty, but her own mind churned with suspicion. The woman in the black car hadn't been the first to know. She wouldn't be the last. Someone, somewhere, had been watching for this trailer, waiting for it to reappear. And now it was in Elena's hands. As night settled fully and she turned out the lantern, Elena lay awake beside her daughter, listening to the creaks of the old structure and the faint whisper of the wind through its seams. Every sound made her tense. Every shadow carried weight. The trailer no longer felt simply like a home salvaged from rust and ruin. It felt like a vault. And a vault this carefully built always held something worth more than money, something worth chasing, and perhaps worth destroying. Her suspicion grew sharper with each passing moment, a truth she could not ignore. The stranger had not offered to buy a broken-down trailer. She had offered to buy silence, to bury whatever story these walls carried. And Elena, by refusing, had chosen to open the door to all that came next. The light inside the trailer was dim that morning, the gray sky outside filtering weakly through the blinds. Elena had been pacing for nearly an hour, the unease of the stranger's visit still heavy on her chest. Every corner of the trailer seemed different now, every seam in the walls suspect. She couldn't shake the sense that eyes had been on this place long before she arrived, that whoever had hidden its secrets had expected people like her to find them. Marisol was the one who noticed the panel. She had been crouched near the far end of the living space, tracing her fingers along the wall where the wallpaper had bubbled. The old glue peeled easily, curling off in brittle flakes. Beneath it, the wooden panel was warped and uneven, its surface pushed outward just slightly compared to the board around it. She knocked against it with her knuckles and heard the hollow sound. "Mom," she said quickly, her voice urgent. "It's like the floor. There's something behind this one." Elena hurried over, crouching beside her. She pressed her palm against the warped panel. It flexed under the weight, not by much, but enough to confirm her daughter was right. Heart pounding, she reached for the screwdriver, wedging the blade into the narrow seam. With a hard twist, the wood gave way, snapping at the edges as it pulled free from its frame. Dust rushed out in a cloud, carrying the stale scent of years sealed in darkness. Behind the panel was a hollow cavity, carefully built into the wall. The space was wide enough to hold several objects, stacked neatly, undisturbed for decades. Elena reached in and pulled one free, a small tin, its surface tarnished but still legible. Stamped across the lid were factory codes, strings of letters and numbers arranged in uniform lines. She turned it over her hands, the weight solid, heavier than she expected. Marisol leaned close, her eyes glowing with excitement. "It's like the stove," she whispered. "It's hiding something." They pulled out more tins, one by one, until half a dozen sat lying on the floor between them. Each was identical in size, though some bore different codes. None were labeled in ways Elena recognized. They weren't the kind of tins you buy for food or household goods. These were industrial, deliberate. She tried to pry one open with her fingernails, but the lid held tight. Frustrated, she reached for the screwdriver again and wedged it under the lip of the lid. With a firm twist, it popped open. Inside was not food, not coins, not anything she had imagined. It was paper. Thin slips folded tight, dozens of them, each bearing more of the strange symbols and numbers they had seen on the map and letters. Routes, coded instructions, references to places Elena barely recognized. Marisol's fingers darted into the tin, pulling one slip free. "Look," she said, spreading it flat against her sketchbook. The paper bore a sequence of numbers paired with spirals and stars. She copied it quickly, her pencil scratching with urgency. Elena opened another tin. This one held a different set of slips, some covered in red ink instead of black, the lines sharper, as if written in haste. The codes were layered, overlapping symbols repeating in sequences that meant nothing to her but seemed to hum with intention. She leaned back against the wall, staring at the small collection of tins. They were too organized to be accidental. Whoever had hidden them had done so with a purpose, carefully sealing them away behind the warped panel. And now, decades later, she and her daughter were the ones breaking that silence. Marisol looked up, her face flushed with the thrill of discovery. "Mom, I think these are like the map. Look, these codes, they match some of the towns he circled. Maybe this is how he kept track of where to go, what to leave." Elena rubbed her temples, overwhelmed. The stranger's words echoed in her memory. "Asterisk, it doesn't belong to you." Asterisk, she understood now. These tins weren't random scraps. They were records, evidence of something that had stretched across states, hidden in plain sight within the walls of an ordinary trailer. She touched the lids of the unopened tins, her hands trembling slightly. Whoever had owned this trailer had built to carry more than cargo. It was a vessel of secrets, compartmentalized and coded so only the right eyes could read them. And now those secrets lay exposed on her floor. For a long moment, she considered sliding the tins back into the cavity, sealing the panel shut as though nothing had been found. But the look on Marisol's face stopped her. Her daughter's eyes shone with conviction, with a sense that they were unraveling something meant to be discovered. Elena exhaled slowly, realizing that whether she wanted it or not, the trailer had chosen them as its new keepers. As night settled, she stacked the tins carefully on the counter, the factory codes gleaming faintly in the lantern light. Marisol bent over her sketchbook, filling page after page with copied symbols and numbers. The trailer groaned softly around them, its old frame shifting the wind, as if reminding them it was alive with memory. Elena stared at the false wall, the empty cavity now exposed, and felt the weight of what they had unearthed. She couldn't escape the thought that every secret they uncovered only drew them closer to a story too large to walk away from. The tins had been spread across the counter for hours, each one pried open with the same cautious care, each one revealing folded slips of paper that carried codes Elena couldn't yet untangle. The trailer's small interior smelled of dust and old ink now, the past pulled into the present one fragile page at a time. Marisol sat cross-legged on the floor, her sketchbook open in front of her, copying the numbers and symbols as quickly as her hand would allow. She seemed tireless, caught in the rhythm of discovery, her young mind absorbing patterns that her mother struggled even to comprehend. Elena picked up another tin, heavier than the others. Its lid bore the same stamped factory code, but the metal felt colder, denser, as if what it held had been packed with precision. She wedged the screwdriver beneath the lid and gave a hard twist. The seal gave way with a metallic snap, and the lid clattered to the counter. Inside lay a single book, compact and bound in cracked leather. Its edges were worn, corners bent, but when she lifted it free, the spine held firm. It was a ledger. The pages inside were filled with neat, narrow handwriting that stretched line after line in a discipline that bordered on obsessive. Columns of numbers ran down one side of each page, dates down the other. Between them were names of towns scattered across the United States, each paired with symbols that echoed the carvings hidden in the trailer's walls. Elena's eyes moved quickly across the lines, her chest tightening as the scope of it struck her. This wasn't a casual journal. It was a record, detailed, meticulous, methodical. She flipped to the middle of the book, stopping at random. April 14th, 1953. Beside the date, a sequence of numbers, followed by the name of a town in Kansas she had only ever seen on road signs. A spiral symbol rested beside it. The same spiral Marisol had drawn a dozen times in her notebook. She turned more pages, each one repeating the same format. Towns in Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, each line marked with the same deliberate hand. Some pages bore red ink, notes that stood out like warnings. Compromised, unsafe, delay. Others bore small drawings, stars, triangles, circles, symbols that had followed them since the first day they peeled wallpaper from the trailer's walls. Marisol climbed onto the chair beside her, peering over her shoulder. Her eyes lit up as she traced one of the lines with her finger. "Look, Mom, that triangle is the same as the one on the map." She flipped quickly through her sketchbook, finding the page where she had copied the map fragment, and said beside the ledger, "See? It matches." Elena nodded slowly, her heart beating faster. "You're right." She flipped another page and found another entry that lined up with a circled town on the map. The ledger wasn't just a record of places. It was a key to understanding the map, the slips of coded paper, the hidden compartments. It was a thread tying everything together. But it wasn't only logistics. As she read deeper, she found notes scrawled in the margins, fragments of thoughts that hinted at something larger. Asterisk, the Brotherhood expects delivery. Asterisk, asterisk, routes must remain unseen. Asterisk, asterisk, Clara must never know. Asterisk, the last line made her pause, the name stabbing through her chest with a sudden pang of recognition. Clara, the same woman the unsent letters had been written to. Whoever had kept this ledger had lived in two worlds. One of devotion to someone named Clara, and one of obligation to something far more secretive and dangerous. Elena closed the book for a moment, holding it tightly between her palms. The weight of it seemed heavier than leather and paper. It was a burden, a record of a man who had carried secrets across the country, using this trailer as both vessel and vault. She glanced at her daughter, who was still scribbling furiously, her pencil flying across the page. Marisol's young face was alight with the thrill of discovery, but Elena's heart ached with unease. Knowledge like this came with risk. She reopened the ledger and studied the final pages. The handwriting grew shakier near the end, as though written by a hand burdened with fatigue or fear. The entries became shorter, the notes sharper. One of the last lines read simply, asterisk, too many watching, must hide the rest. Asterisk another. Asterisk, the trailer will keep it safe. Asterisk, and then, finally, asterisk, if it finds new hands, may they be wiser than me. Asterisk, the words lingered, echoing in her mind. Elena closed the ledger again, her fingers trembling slightly. The man in the photograph had stood proudly by this trailer, but pride was not all he left behind. He had left his history sealed in tins and compartments, in symbols and codes, in a book that stretched across the spine of the country. Elena set the ledger on the counter, staring at it as if it might speak. In a way, it already had. It told her that what they had uncovered was bigger than either of them had realized. And though the temptation of $15,000 still gnawed at her, she now understood why the stranger at the door had made the offer so quickly. This was not about rust or scrap. It was about what was written in this book. The rain began again outside, light against the roof, a steady reminder of the fragile shelter that now guarded them. Elena reached for the ledger, pulling it close. Whatever dangers might come, she knew one thing. The story of the trailer was still unfolding, and the ledger was its beating heart. The morning after they uncovered the ledger, Elena moved through the trailer with a restless energy. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by dreams of highways stretching into endless darkness and faceless men waiting at crossroads. She rose before Marisol and busied herself with small tasks, rearranging the tins on the counter, folding the blankets they used for bedding, sweeping the grit that never seemed to disappear from the floor. But her mind wasn't on cleaning. It was on the growing sense that the trailer was more than just a collection of secrets. It was a machine, every part of it hiding pieces that connected to something larger. When Marisol stirred awake, she went straight for her sketchbook, opening it to the page where she had copied the spirals, the stars, the triangles. She added more details to the drawings from the ledger, her small hand steady as though she had done this for years instead of days. Elena watched her for a moment before turning back to the kitchenette, determined to clear out the cabinets beneath the sink. The wood there had swollen from years of leaks, the surface warped and soft, the doors sagging on their hinges. She pulled them open with effort, a sour smell of dampness hitting her nose. Inside was little more than what she expected. A rusted pipe, bits of broken tile, a scattering of dust and insects that scurried away at the light. She leaned in, bracing her hand against the back wall of the cabinet, and felt something strange. The panel didn't sit flush. Her palm pressed against it, and it shifted slightly under pressure. Not like a wall, but like a door. Her breath caught. She bent lower, running her fingers along the seam. There, almost invisible beneath the grime, was a thin groove, the faint outline of a hidden drawer. She tugged at it with her nails, but it didn't budge. She reached for the screwdriver again, wedging it into the gap. With a careful twist, the drawer slid forward with a sound like a sigh, dust trailing behind it. Marisol was at her side instantly, crouching low to see. "What is it?" Elena pulled the drawer fully open. Inside, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, lay a single object. She lifted it out, the weight surprising her, solid and cold in her hand. Carefully, she unwrapped the cloth to reveal a medallion of brass, its surface darkened with age but still gleaming faintly in the dim light. The design was simple yet striking. At its center was a circle divided into 4 quadrants, each marked with a compass point, north, south, east, and west, engraved with crisp precision. Around the edges, faint lines radiated outward, almost like the spokes of a wheel. Elena turned it over in her palm, her pulse quickening. Marisol's gasp was sharp. "Mom, it's the same." She scrambled for her sketchbook, flipping through pages until she found the one covered in compass-like symbols. She pressed the drawing beside the medallion, her finger darting between the two. "See? The same lines, the same points." I knew it meant something. Elena stared at the comparison, her mouth dry. The brass medallion wasn't just similar to the sketches. It was the same symbol, etched into something meant to last. Whoever had carved the symbols into the trailer's walls had carried this medallion, had likely used it as a key to their code. She ran her thumb over the compass points, feeling the shallow grooves. "What do you think it's for?" Marisol asked, her eyes wide. Elena shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but it's not just decoration. Look, the edges." She tilted it, revealing a faint indentation near the rim, as if it could fit into something like a lock or mechanism. Her thoughts flashed back to the star-shaped drawer, the stove's lockbox, the warnings in the ledger. Each piece seemed to demand another, as if they were all waiting for this medallion to complete them. Marisol's excitement only grew. She began sketching the medallion itself, adding it to her collection of symbols. "It's the center," she said firmly, more to herself than to her mother. "Everything lines up around it. The map, the ledger, the carvings are all pointing here." Elena listened, unease threading through her veins. The stranger's offer, Harlan's warning, the unsent letters, they all seemed clearer now. People had wanted this trailer not because it was a curiosity, but because it was a vault for things like this medallion. She couldn't shake the feeling that holding it connected her to something that had not ended, something that might still be moving in shadows, waiting for its secrets to be uncovered. She wrapped the medallion back in the cloth, though the weight of it still pressed into her hand, heavy with implication. Marisol frowned. "Why hide it again? We need it." "We'll keep it safe," Elena said quietly, tucking it into her jacket pocket. She met her daughter's eyes, her voice low. "Safe with us, until we know what it unlocks." The drawer slid shut again, disappearing into the wood, as if it had never been there. But Elena knew the trailer had shifted once more, another layer peeled away. The medallion was not just another secret. It was a key, and keys always open something. The day after Elena found the medallion, she stood outside the trailer hanging damp clothes on a line strung between 2 leaning poles. The air carried the smell of wet earth from the storm, and the sky was still heavy with clouds. Marisol sat on the steps with her sketchbook balanced on her knees, flipping between the pages of symbols and her careful drawings of the brass medallion. She studied them as if answers might crawl out of the pencil lines themselves. It was then that a voice called across the fence. "You've been busy in there." Elena turned. The speaker was Mrs. Calloway, one of the oldest neighbors on the street. She was a wiry woman with thinning white hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that had not softened with age. She leaned against her cane, her gaze fixed on the trailer rather than Elena. For years, Mrs. Calloway had lived in her sagging house at the corner, watching everything that passed. People said she remembered things most had long forgotten. Elena forced a polite smile, just trying to make it livable. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. That place was never just for living. I'd know those marks anywhere. Elena's breath caught. She stepped closer to the fence. "What do you mean?" The old woman tapped the side of her cane against the gravel, her expression unreadable. "My father drove freight long, before highways cut this country into neat strips. He was on the road in the 40s and 50s, back when men hauled more than just cargo. They had their own ways, their own rules. A brotherhood, they called it, a guild of truckers who kept to themselves and carried what others couldn't or wouldn't through official means." She paused, her eyes flicking toward Marisol, who was listening intently. "Those symbols you've been drawing? I've seen them before. Painted on the inside walls of garages, carved on rest stop tables, etched into lockers at depots no one uses anymore. They belong to the Brotherhood." Elena felt her chest tighten. The Brotherhood. The word carried weight even without context. She glanced at Marisol, who clutched her sketchbook tighter, her pencil hovering. What did the symbols mean? Elena asked carefully. Mrs. Calloway lowered herself onto her porch step, leaning heavily on the cane. Codes, directions, warnings. Each mark had meaning. A spiral told a man where it was safe to stop for the night. A star pointed to a meeting place. Triangles meant crossing points, places where you'd hand off a load without ever signing a paper. They weren't just truckers. They moved things the government didn't want moved. Some said it was money. Others said weapons. My father always said it was knowledge. Documents, names, things too dangerous to sit in banks or offices. Things that had to stay moving to stay alive. Elena's pulse raced. She thought of the tin behind a false wall, the ledger filled with towns and dates, the sealed envelope warning of death without the key. All of it aligned with what Mrs. Calloway was saying. The trailer wasn't random. It had been built to serve the Brotherhood's hidden routes, its walls designed to protect secrets that could never be entrusted to ordinary hands. "Why would they hide the symbols here?" she asked. Mrs. Calloway's voice dropped. "Because this trailer was one of theirs. I remember seeing it once, long ago, parked near a depot outside St. Louis. I was just a girl, but I never forgot the way the men stood around it, guarding it like a shrine. They said it carried more than steel and wood. It carried their trust. When it vanished, folks assumed the government seized it or the Brotherhood destroyed it themselves. No one thought it would resurface." Her eyes met Elena's, sharp despite their age. "But here it is, and now it belongs to you." The words left Elena speechless. She looked back at the trailer, its rusted frame glowing faintly in the dull light. The laughter of neighbors, the jeers at her purchase. All of it seemed distant now. What stood in her yard was not junk. It was a vessel of a hidden history, a relic of a guild that had once moved silently across the backbone of country. Marisol stood and walked the fence, holding out her sketchbook. "These," she said shyly. "Are these really what you saw?" Mrs. Calloway peered down, her hand trembling as she turned the pages. "Yes," she whispered. "Every one of them. Be careful with them, child. Those marks carried power. Men lived and died by them." The old woman closed the book gently and handed it back, her gaze lingering on Marisol's face with something like pity. Then she turned away, shuffling slowly back toward her porch. Over her shoulder she added, "Secrets like that don't stay buried. Not forever. And people who come looking won't care that you're just a mother and her daughter. They'll only care about what you found." Elena stood frozen by the fence, the weight of the medallion pressing heavily in her pocket. The Brotherhood, a guild that had hidden its story across highways and towns, now bleeding through the cracks of a rusted trailer. She pulled Marisol close, her daughter's sketchbook clutched between them. Whatever this was, it was no longer just mystery. It was legacy, and it had already reached their door. The afternoon was warmer than it had been in days, the sun finally breaking through the thick cover of clouds. Elena used a brief stretch of light to hang blankets outside, though her eyes kept drifting back to the trailer, as if she expected it to shift or breathe while she wasn't looking. The conversation with Mrs. Calloway weighed on her. This talk of a brotherhood, of hidden routes and coded symbols. The trailer no longer felt like a home at all, but a vessel with its own memory, one that had chosen her and Marisol, whether they were ready or not. Marisol had been restless since morning. She carried her sketchbook under her arm, but instead of drawing, she kept pacing around the trailer, circling it with narrowed eyes. Every so often she would crouch, run her fingers along the seams of the siding, or knock against the thin metal, as if listening for something. Elena called out to her once, asked her what she was doing, but the girl only said, "It doesn't end inside, Mom." If they built hiding places in the walls and the stove, then they built them underneath too. Before Elena could argue, Marisol dropped to her knees and slid herself under the trailer's frame, ignoring the dirt and spider webs that clung to the narrow space. Elena froze, her heart leaping to her throat. "Marisol!" she called sharply, rushing toward her. She knelt and peered under the trailer, but her daughter had already disappeared deeper into the shadows. Only the sound of scraping and muffled knocks reached her. "Come out of there right now," Elena demanded, her voice tight with fear. But Marisol didn't listen. A few seconds later, her voice carried out, breathless with excitement. "Mom, there's something here." Elena pressed her cheek closer to the ground, straining to see. At first there was only darkness, the low underbelly of the trailer streaked with rust. Then she spotted her daughter, crouched low with her flashlight pressed against the floor beams. The beam caught on something square and unnatural, a section that would fit it differently than the rest. Marisol tapped it with her knuckles, and even from above, Elena heard the hollow reply. "It's a door," Marisol said, her words fast, urgent. "There's a trapdoor under here." Elena's stomach twisted. "That doesn't make sense. How would you even open it?" Marisol crawled closer to the square of wood, brushing away clumps of dirt. Her small fingers fell along the edge until they stopped at a thick metal bolt. She tugged, but it wouldn't move. "It's bolted," she called. From the inside, the words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Elena's breath caught as the implication sank in. A trapdoor sealed with a bolt on the inside meant only one thing. Someone had once used it from within. It wasn't meant to be opened by outsiders. It was meant to keep something or someone inside. Elena forced herself to breathe steadily. "Marisol, crawl back out. Now." Her daughter obeyed reluctantly, wriggling backward until she emerged, her face streaked with dirt, her hands black with soil. She looked up at her mother, her eyes alight with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Mom, it's real," she whispered. "They built it to hide things under the trailer." Elena pulled her into her arms, brushing the dirt from her hair. Her heart hammered as she looked back at the trailer, seeing it with new eyes once again. The false walls, the hidden tins, the coded letters, the medallion, the ledger, all of it was only part of the design. Beneath the floor was something deeper, something they had not yet touched. Marisol broke free of her mother's arms and opened her sketchbook again, kneeling in the dirt to draw the outline of the trapdoor and the bolt she had seen. "It means the map wasn't just about where they went," she said with certainty. "It's about what they built into this trailer. Every mark, every clue, it's all connected to places like this." Elena crouched beside her, watching her daughter's pencil move quickly across the page. The air felt heavier, as though the ground itself hummed with memory. A trapdoor, bolted from the inside, waiting silently beneath them. She laid her hand on Marisol's shoulder, steadying herself as much as her daughter. "Whatever's down there, we're not opening it alone," she said softly. Yet even as the words left her lips, she knew the truth. The trailer hadn't let them walk away yet, and it wouldn't start now. Somewhere beneath their feet, locked away by bolts no outsider could touch, was the next chapter of the Brotherhood's story. It was only a matter of time before it demanded to be found. The discovery of the trapdoor had left Elena restless, her thoughts circling back to it no matter how she tried to push them aside. That night she lay awake listening to the creak of the trailer, the way the wind pushed against its thin frame. Every groan of the floor felt like a reminder of what lay beneath them, hidden away for decades. By morning, she had decided she couldn't ignore it any longer. When the sun was barely up, she pulled Marisol aside and told her they were going to try. The girl's eyes widened, excitement flashing across her face, but Elena silenced her with a finger to her lips. "Quiet," she said firmly. "We don't want the neighbors knowing." She wasn't sure if anyone was watching, but after the stranger's visit, she no longer trusted the silence around them. They crouched together on the floor, Elena's hands running over the boards where the hollow sound had rung out days before. With the screwdriver and a pry bar, she began working at the seams. The wood groaned, splintering under the pressure, until at last a section lifted away. Beneath it, a cavity yawned open, the darkness damp and stale with the scent of trapped air. Elena lowered the lantern into the gap. Its glow revealed a row of metal canisters, stacked neatly side by side, sealed tight with bolted lids. Dust coated them thickly, but even so they gleamed faintly under the light, untouched by time. Her breath caught. This was no ordinary hiding place. With careful hands, she reached down and lifted one free. It was heavier than she expected. Cold to the touch, the lid sealed with a tight metal clasp. Marisol leaned close, her voice trembling with excitement. "Open it, Mom." Elena hesitated, her heart pounding. She unfastened the clasp with effort, the metal protesting after so many years, and pried the lid loose. Inside, instead of money or trinkets, were thick bundles of paper. She pulled one out carefully and unfolded it on the floor. The paper was yellow but crisp, the ink still sharp. Bonds, official documents, stamped and numbered, bearing the seals of companies long dissolved. She reached for another bundle. Stock certificates, their ornate borders framing the names of corporations that had collapsed decades ago, names she vaguely recognized from history books or half-forgotten news clippings. Railroad lines, steel companies, banks that had vanished in mergers or bankruptcies. Each sheet bore signatures, embossed seals, numbers that once represented immense sums of money. Marisol traced the elaborate lettering with her finger, her eyes wide. "What are these worth?" Elena swallowed hard, staring at the stacks of paper inside canister. "I don't know. Some might be worthless now. But some—" She trailed off, thinking of companies that had merged into giants still alive today. Bonds from one generation could become fortunes in another if they had been preserved legally. They opened a second canister, then a third. Each was the same, bundles of bonds and certificates, arranged with obsessive care. Someone had hidden wealth here, not in coins or gold, but in the fragile permanence of paper, enough to tie together lifetimes, enough to tempt strangers to come knocking at her door with checks already written. Elena sat back on her heels, staring at the canisters spread across the floor. Her chest tightened as she realized the scale of it. This wasn't the savings of a cautious man. This was a treasury, deliberately concealed beneath the floor of a traveling home. Whoever the man in the photograph had been, he had trusted the Brotherhood's methods to guard it. Marisol clutched her sketchbook to her chest, her voice soft but sure. "This is why they're watching us. This is why that woman came." Elena nodded slowly, the weight of it pressing against her like the air in the cavity itself. She thought of the ledger, of the coded map, of the envelope sealed in wax. All of them had pointed to movement, to secrecy, to a system that kept dangerous things alive by keeping them hidden. And now here it was, tangible in her hands. Wealth that outlived its owners, sleeping in darkness until she and her daughter had torn the floor open. She closed the lid on the nearest canister and slid it back into the compartment. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "No one can know about this. Not yet." Marisol leaned against her shoulder, nodding, but her eyes remained fixed on the cavity, on the sealed canisters that still glinted in the lantern's light, as if daring them to be forgotten again. Elena covered the opening with cloth and lowered the floorboard carefully back into place. The trailer was quiet again, but the silence felt different now, heavier. They had broken through to something the past had guarded with ruthless care. And though the canisters were hidden once more, Elena knew the truth. The secrets beneath the floor would not stay buried forever. They had claimed her and her daughter, binding them to a story that was only beginning to unfold. The morning began with the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood: dogs barking, the faint hum of lawnmowers, the occasional rattle of a truck on the road. Elena was inside the trailer, folding the few clothes she and Marisol owned into neat piles on a shelf, trying to force a sense of normalcy back into their days. But the unease hadn't left her since the discovery beneath the floorboards. Every time she stepped over the place where the canisters lay hidden, she felt the weight of them pressing upward, reminding her that the secrets they carried were not meant to be simple possessions. The knock at the door was not like the careful tap of the well-dressed woman or the sharp raps of impatient neighbors. It was heavy, purposeful, the sound of someone certain of their right to be answered. Elena stiffened immediately, her instincts warning her before she even reached the door. She opened it only a crack at first. A man stood there, tall and broad, his hair slicked back with precision, his suit cut sharp enough to look out of place in the dusty street. In his hand, he carried a slim leather portfolio. His expression was one of polite confidence, the kind that didn't ask for permission so much as assumed it. "Mrs. Morales?" he asked, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Yes," Elena answered cautiously. "I'm Henry Caldwell. I represent Caldwell Properties, the development firm overseeing this area." He gestured toward the trailer with his portfolio. "That unit you're occupying, there's been a mistake. It's part of our company's historic claims. I'll need to see to it that it's returned." Elena's grip on the door tightened. "Returned? I bought it at auction. I have the papers." Caldwell smiled thinly, as if he'd anticipated her words. He opened his portfolio and pulled out a set of documents, unfolding them with deliberate care. "I'm sure you believe that," he said smoothly. "But this trailer has a complicated history. Our records show it was tied to certain holdings from the mid-20th century. You could say it's an artifact. Legally, its ownership reverts to our company. Of course, I'd be happy to handle the transition quickly and without fuss." Behind Elena, Marisol had come to stand in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the man. She clutched her sketchbook tight against her chest, as if shielding it. Elena glanced down at the papers Caldwell held out. They were dense with legal language, stamped with seals that looked official enough to intimidate anyone less suspicious. Still, her stomach churned with anger. "You say it's an artifact," she said slowly, "but you don't want it for history. You want it for what's inside." For the first time, Caldwell's expression shifted just slightly. A flicker in his eyes betrayed that she had touched a nerve. He recovered quickly, folding the papers back into his portfolio with a snap. "Mrs. Morales," he said evenly, "you've stumbled into something you don't understand. The sooner you cooperate, the easier this will be for everyone. I can offer you a fair settlement for your trouble." "Like 15,000? Elena asked sharply, remembering the woman at the door. Caldwell's smile froze. He didn't answer, but the silence confirmed enough. They weren't acting alone. Whoever wanted this trailer had resources, and they were coordinated. Marisol stepped closer to her mother, her small voice cutting through the tension. "You can't have it," she said firmly, her eyes locked on the man. Caldwell tilted his head, regarding her with mild amusement, though his jaw tightened. "This isn't a matter for children. I'll give you time to think, Mrs. Morales. But understand, this trailer doesn't belong to you. It never did." With that, he turned and walked away, his shoes crunching against the gravel, his polished frame retreating toward a waiting black SUV parked down the street. He climbed inside, the door shutting with sound that seemed too final, and the vehicle rolled away without hurry, as though confident it would return. Elena closed the door and pressed her forehead against it, her body trembling. She looked down at Marisol, who still clutched her sketchbook, her face pale but determined. "They know, Mom," Marisol whispered. "Everyone who comes here already knows." Elena pulled her daughter close, holding her tightly. The stranger with the checkbook had been unsettling, but Caldwell's appearance was worse. He had arrived not with offers, but with paperwork, the weight of institutions and money behind him. Whatever lay within the trailer wasn't just of interest to curious collectors. It was something powerful enough to draw in companies with the resources to rewrite ownership records and send men in suits to quiet a single mother and her child. She shut the blinds tightly and locked the flimsy door, though she knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined to enter. The trailer creaked faintly in the wind, its thin walls offering little comfort. Yet as Elena held her daughter close, one thought cut through her fear with sharp clarity. If the trailer carried a history strong enough to draw such people to her door, then she and Marisol would have to decide whether to protect it or reveal it. Either way, there was no going back. The Brotherhood's secrets had been claimed by their hands, and powerful forces were already circling to take them away. The following week, just as the tension from the developer's visit had begun to settle into a constant hum at the back of Elena's mind, another knock came at the door. This one was lighter, more hesitant. The kind of knock that asked permission rather than demanded it. Elena opened the door a careful inch, her body braced for another figure in a suit. Instead, she found a man who seemed utterly out of place on the street. He was in his early 50s, his jacket worn at the elbows, his satchel scuffed and heavy with papers. His hair, salt and pepper, was uncombed, and his round glasses slid slightly down the bridge of his nose as he looked at her with a cautious smile. "Mrs. Morales?" he asked. His voice was measured, polite. "My name is Daniel Kravitz. I'm a historian with the State University. May I speak with you?" Elena's grip on the door tightened. "If you're here to buy the trailer, save your breath." His smile deepened faintly. "No, not to buy. Only to explain. I believe you found something unusual, and I think you deserve to know why people are so interested." There was something in his tone, earnest, almost weary, that made Elena pause. Against her instincts, she opened the door wider. Marisol, seated at the table with her sketchbook, looked up and studied him with sharp eyes. Professor Kravitz stepped inside with care, his gaze moving over the walls, the counters, the floorboards, as if he were walking through a museum exhibit rather than a home. He set his satchel down on the counter and pulled out a stack of folders, old photographs, and brittle newspapers. "This trailer," he began, "is more than a relic. It's part of a network that stretched across the country in the years after World War II. Most people never knew it existed. They called it the Brotherhood, truckers, drivers, and handlers who moved things the government wanted hidden and things others wanted buried. The war left behind more than rubble. It left behind secrets. And men like the one who owned this trailer were tasked with keeping those secrets moving." Elena folded her arms, watching him carefully. "We've heard about the Brotherhood." Kravitz nodded, unsurprised. He unfolded a photograph and laid it on the counter. It showed a group of men standing beside a line of trucks, their faces stern, their coats heavy with dust. In the corner of one truck's side panel, faint but visible, was a carved star with lines radiating outward. The same design that Marisol had copied again and again in her notebook. "They use symbols like this," he explained, tapping the photo. "Codes carved, drawn, or stamped. A spiral might mean a safe house. A triangle meant a crossroads. The star was the key, always the key. It marked the ones carrying more than simple cargo." Marisol leaned forward, her sketchbook open to her own careful drawings. "I knew it," she whispered, pointing to her compass sketches. "I knew it meant something." The professor studied her pages with genuine admiration. "You've done remarkable work," he said warmly. "These are the same patterns we've documented in depots and abandoned truck stops across the Midwest. But here, you found them preserved in one piece. The trailer itself is a map, a cipher. And inside it," he hesitated, his eyes searching Elena's face. "You've already discovered more, haven't you?" Elena said nothing, but the silence was enough. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The Brotherhood carried bonds, certificates, cash, and documents no bank could hold. In those days, the country was rebuilding and black markets thrived. Factories and railroads collapsed, corporations dissolved, fortunes vanished on paper. But much of it didn't vanish at all. It was hidden, moved quietly across states until the trail grew cold. This trailer was part of that system, a vault on wheels, and now it has resurfaced." Elena felt her chest tighten as his words confirmed what she already feared. She remembered the sealed canisters beneath the floor, the ledger that mapped routes across the nation, the brass medallion etched with compass points. She thought of the stranger offering money, of Caldwell with his legal papers. None of them wanted the trailer for its rusted walls. They wanted what the Brotherhood had left inside. Professor Kravitz reached back into his satchel and pulled out another document. This one a faded clipping from a 1950s newspaper. The headline read, "Federal agents deny existence of truck smuggling ring." Beneath it was a grainy photo of men standing beside confiscated freight. The government denied it, of course, but men disappeared. Records vanished, and pieces of a network dissolved into silence. What survived went underground. Trailers like this one were scattered, lost, sometimes destroyed. Finding one intact is extraordinary. Marisol whispered, "So it's true, all of it?" Kravitz nodded. "Yes, but be careful. What you hold isn't just history. It's evidence. People will want to claim it, bury it, or profit from it. That's why they've come knocking at your door." Elena closed her eyes briefly, the weight of it pressing down. "What do we do with it?" The professor's voice softened. "That depends on what kind of story you want to tell. The Brotherhood built it to protect what they carried, not for themselves, but for those who would come after. You've inherited that trust. Whether you guard it, reveal it, or let it vanish again, that choice is yours." The lantern light flickered across his papers, casting long shadows across the cramped space. Elena felt Marisol slip her hand into hers, the girl's small fingers steady. Whatever they chose, it was no longer just a story of a rusted trailer. It was a story of a country's forgotten past, and the two of them were now part of it. Professor Kravitz lingered in the trailer long after the first explanations, his satchel spread open on the counter like a chest of fragile treasures. Elena made coffee on the battered stovetop, while Marisol perched on a chair, her sketchbook resting across her lap. The man had an air of weariness about him, but beneath it was a current of excitement, as though he had stumbled into something he had spent years chasing. From the satchel, he drew another folder, thicker this time, its edges frayed with age. He opened it carefully, spreading yellow clippings and photocopies across the counter. Headlines screamed in bold black letters. Rail magnates accused of hidden routes. Trucking syndicates under investigation. Asterisk, secret guild may control Midwest freight lines. Asterisk, each clipping was dated between 1946 and 1957. The peak of a country still stitching itself back together after the war. "These," he said, adjusting his glasses, "are what we call Brotherhood files. They're scraps of what survived the purge. Most records were destroyed, deliberately, but these few clippings, saved by reporters and librarians who didn't know their significance, are the reason some of us know the Brotherhood existed at all." Elena leaned over the counter, her eyes tracing the brittle newsprint. She read phrases that leapt out at her. Off-book shipments, midnight convoys, asterisk, untraceable assets move between depots. Asterisk, the language was cautious, suggesting rumors rather than proof, yet the repetition across years was undeniable. Kravitz tapped one particular clipping with his finger. "This one here, Chicago Tribune, 1952. The reporter claimed a syndicate of railroad and trucking tycoons had pooled their influence after the war. Their goal was to keep control of freight outside government oversight. They built their own system of trust, their own language of symbols, and their own fleet of vehicles. Trailers like this one." Marisol leaned closer, pointing to a grainy black and white photograph printed with the article. In the background of a freight yard, half obscured by men in suits, was the outline of a trailer. It was newer then, its paint shining, its frame strong, but the small details were unmistakable. The shape of the door, the curve of the wheel well. Even the dent above the side window was visible. "That's ours," Marisol whispered, her voice trembling with awe. Kravitz nodded. "Yes, this very trailer. I've followed this image for years, wondering where it vanished. According to the files, it disappeared not long after this photograph was taken. Officially, it was scrapped, but the Brotherhood didn't scrap things. They hid them." Elena pressed her hands flat against the counter, her heart hammering. "You're telling me tycoons own this? Railroad men, trucking magnates? This was theirs." It was one of their most trusted vessels, the professor said gravely. When federal oversight grew tighter, they needed to move assets, bonds, stocks, even entire payrolls without paper trails. They created a shadow system, guided by symbols, trusted only among themselves. This trailer carried their fortunes through the cracks of the nation's highways. Every compartment, every false wall, every mechanism you've uncovered was designed by them, not to keep out thieves, but to keep out governments. Marisol clutched her sketchbook tighter, as though the weight of the history pressed against her small frame. She flipped quickly to her drawings of the compass medallion, sliding it in front of Kravitz. "This," she said firmly, "was in a hidden drawer. Do you know what it means?" Kravitz studied the sketch, his eyes widening slightly. "A compass rose," he murmured, "but stylized. I've seen this emblem before, in archives tied to the Brotherhood files. It marked the highest tier of their network, the inner circle. Only a few carried medallions like this. It was proof of authority, a key to the deeper routes." He looked at Elena, his expression grave. "It means your trailer wasn't ordinary. It was one of their master vessels. Whoever carried the medallion had power over the Brotherhood's most secret operations." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The ledger, the map, the sealed envelope, the canisters of bonds. Everything pointed to a scale larger than she had dared imagine. This wasn't just about one man and his secrets. It was about a syndicate powerful enough to shape the hidden economy of post-war America, and her rusted trailer had been one of their chosen tools. Kravitz gathered the clippings back into his folder with careful hands, though his eyes lingered on the walls of the trailer, as if they might still yield more proof. "You must understand," he said softly, "that what you hold is dangerous. Not because of curses or legends, but because of greed. The Brotherhood may have vanished, but their heirs, their rivals, their enemies. Someone has been waiting for this to resurface. That's why they've come to your door." Elena looked at Marisol, who was already sketching the trailer itself, her pencil moving furiously to capture it not as junk metal, but as what it truly was, a vault of history. For the first time since she had bought it, Elena saw it with new eyes. It wasn't just a home. It was evidence of a secret empire that had thrived in shadows. And now, by accident or fate, it was theirs to protect. The evening was unusually still, the kind of quiet that made even the creak of the trailer seem louder than it should. Elena had been pacing for hours, her thoughts circling like restless birds. The canisters beneath the floor, the medallion, the ledger, the clippings Professor Kravitz had shown her, they all pointed to a system of hiding, layering secrets until the trailer itself had become less a home and more a vault. That knowledge weighed on her each time she walked its narrow aisles, every wall seeming to whisper that it still had more to reveal. It was Marisol who noticed the water heater first. She had been crouched in the back corner, flipping through her sketchbook by lantern light, when her eyes drifted to the dented cylinder of metal squatting against the wall. Its rust-stained surface had blended into the background of the trailer for days, just another piece of junk left behind. But now, something about its placement seemed wrong. She ran her hand along the side and frowned. "Mom," she said softly, "why would they leave this if the pipes are cut?" Elena looked up sharply. She crossed the room and examined it closely. The heater was old, its fittings corroded, its base marked with dark streaks of age. She knelt and tugged at one of the pipes, loose, disconnected, useless. A suspicion rose in her chest. She knocked against the cylinder with her knuckles. Instead of the dull ring of metal, the sound came back hollow. Her heart quickened. "Help me move it," she said. Together, they pushed against the heater. It groaned but shifted, sliding a few inches across the warped floorboards. Beneath the grime, a seam became visible, a square door cut into the body of the heater itself. Elena brushed away the dust, revealing a recessed panel with a dial. Numbers ringed the face of it, worn but still legible. The heater wasn't a heater at all. It was a disguise. Inside was a safe. Marisol's breath caught. "It's real," she whispered. "It's like the stove. It's all a trick." Elena stared at the dial, her hands trembling slightly. "It needs a code." Marisol flipped frantically through her sketchbook, then reached for the ledger lying on the counter. She turned to the pages where symbols crowded the margins beside dates and towns. "Look, these," she said, tapping a series of spirals and triangles that repeated across different entries. "They're not just notes. They're numbers." Elena leaned closer, her mind racing. The ledger had seemed at first like a record of routes, a map of where and when. But now, she saw it differently. Some of the symbols lined up perfectly with the notches on the safe dial. The spiral matched with the number 3, the triangle with 7, the star with 9. It was a cipher disguised as a logbook. Her pulse hammered as she tried the sequence Marisol pointed out. Slowly, carefully, she turned the dial. 3 clicks left, 7 clicks right, 9 clicks left. The dial groaned, stiff with age, but it moved. Finally, with one last turn, the mechanism gave a faint metallic snap. The safe door creaked open. Inside lay bundles wrapped in wax paper, stacked neatly in rows. Elena lifted one free, her fingers trembling as she peeled back the covering. Documents spilled into her hands. Stamped with seals, their language formal and precise. More stock certificates. Bonds. But these were different. They bore names of companies she knew still existed. Corporations that had swallowed their smaller rivals over the decades, giants whose worth was beyond imagination. Her breath caught. "These aren't just scraps," she whispered. "Some of these could still be valid." Marisol's eyes glowed as she leaned closer. "It's like the map said, everything connects. He left a code in the ledger, so someone could find this." Elena placed the documents back into the safe with careful hands. She closed the door, though she didn't bother locking it again. Her chest ached with the weight of what she had uncovered. This wasn't just a forgotten relic of post-war smuggling. It was a fortune, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to see it. She pulled Marisol close, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't tell anyone. Not yet. Not even the professor." The heater sat silent before them, its disguise plain once again. To anyone else, it was nothing but rusted scrap. But Elena and her daughter knew the truth. The Brotherhood had built this trailer as a vault for an empire's secrets, and one of its greatest safes had just opened to them that night. As the lantern flickered low and the wind rattled against the thin walls, Elena lay awake listening to the silence. The safe was still there, only feet away, filled with paper that carried power enough to change lives or destroy them. And for the first time, she realized she was no longer just uncovering the past. She was holding the future in her hands. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns, faster than Elena could contain it. The whispers about her rusted trailer, the odd visitors in suits, the elderly historian carrying stacks of yellow papers. None of it had escaped notice. By the end of the week, it wasn't just neighbors watching her yard from behind curtains. It was her own family pulling into Gravel Drive, their cars lined up like an uninvited council summoned to pass judgment. Elena was at the sink when she saw them through the streak window. Her sister Maria, stepping out of a sedan with her usual air of impatience. Her cousin Victor following close behind. And even her uncle Javier, his shoulders heavy with the authority of the oldest relative present. They didn't knock gently. They pounded, voices carrying through the thin walls before she could reach the door. "Elena, open up. We need to talk." Marisol shrank behind her mother, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, her eyes wide with the nervous dread that came whenever family gatherings turned sharp. Elena sighed, wiped her hands on a towel, and opened the door. The air filled instantly with Maria's perfume, strong and cloying, and Victor's sharp tone cutting through it. "This is nonsense," Maria said before even stepping inside. Her eyes swept the trailer with disdain, landing on the peeling walls and patched floorboards. "You're wasting your time here. Everyone's talking about it. A piece of junk, Elena. You should have sold it the minute someone offered you money." Victor was louder, angrier. "Do you even realize what $15,000 means? That woman gave you a chance to walk away with more than you'll ever get out of this wreck. And you turned her down? For what? To live in rust and rot with your daughter?" Elena felt her jaw tighten. She stood in the doorway, refusing to let them all press inside, though they craned their necks to peer past her as if the secrets of the trailer might be written on its walls. "This isn't just about money," she said firmly. Uncle Javier cleared his throat, his voice slow and deliberate, meant to weigh down the room. Elena, family looks out for each other. If you're sitting on something valuable, you don't hoard it. You sell it, take the cash, and move on. That's how people survive. Don't get caught up in fairy tales about history and symbols. That trailer is a coffin of bad luck, and everyone knows it. Marisol's voice broke through, small but sharp. It's not bad luck. It's important. She stepped forward, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. You don't understand what's inside. It's not just junk. Maria laughed, a cruel edge and sound. Listen to the child, talking about importance. Elena, you're filling her head with nonsense. What she needs is stability, not codes and scribbles in a notebook. Elena's face flushed, her fists tightening at her sides. She wanted to shout, to tell them about the ledger, the canisters, the safe hidden in the water heater. She wanted to show them the evidence that this trailer carried more than any of them could guess. But she stopped herself. The moment they knew, the moment the truth was out, it wouldn't be a family argument anymore. It would be a feeding frenzy. You think I don't know what money means? She said, her voice trembling but steadying as she spoke. You think I haven't counted every dollar until it hurt? But this isn't for you to decide. This isn't for quick cash or gossip at the kitchen table. This is mine and it's Marisol's, and you will not bully me into giving away. Victor stepped closer, his face hard. You're being foolish. Pride doesn't pay bills. When this all comes crashing down, and it will, don't come to us for help. Uncle Javier nodded gravely, as though sealing the matter. You've always been stubborn. Elena, don't let that ruin your daughter's future. Sell the thing before it ruins you both. Elena held her ground, her body blocking the door. Then you'll just have to watch me ruin myself, she said, her voice low, final. Because I'm not selling. Not to you, not to anyone. This trailer stays. The silence after her words was thick, broken only by the sound of Maria's scoff as she turned on her heel, muttering about wasted chances. Victor followed, his anger spilling into sharp curses as he slammed his car door. Uncle Javier lingered a moment longer, his gaze steady, almost pitying, before he, too, walked away. Elena closed the door, her hand shaking as she slid the lock into place. Marisol rushed to her, wrapping her arms tight around her waist. For a long moment they stood together in the silence of the trailer, the voices of family fading into the distance. Elena pressed her lips to her daughter's hair and whispered, "We'll protect it, no matter what they say." Outside, the cars pulled away, their engines echoing down the road. Inside, the trailer seemed to breathe again, its secret still theirs alone, for now. The house was quiet after the storm of relatives left, but the quiet didn't feel restful. It felt tense, a silence stretched too thin, like the air before glass breaks. Elena sat at the small counter with her head in her hands, staring at the sealed canisters they had yet to move back beneath the floor. Each one gleamed faintly in the dim light, reminders of choices she didn't know how to make. Her family's voices still echoed in her ears. Sell it, take the money, don't be foolish. For a brief moment, she wondered if they were right. Perhaps holding on to this trailer was madness. Perhaps clinging to secrets carved into wood and hidden beneath rust was just another way of keeping herself and her daughter chained to struggle. She barely noticed when Marisol climbed into the chair across from her, sketchbook open on her lap. The child had been quiet through the arguments, through the shouting and accusations, but now her eyes were steady, her voice calm in a way that made Elena lift her head. "Mom," she said softly, "they're wrong." Elena tried to smile, tried to brush it aside. They just don't understand. It's easier for them to see rust than to see what's underneath. But Marisol shook her head firmly, flipping open the pages of her sketchbook. She turned around so her mother could see the drawings, spirals, stars, triangles, and now the compass rose medallion, drawn over and over in her careful hand. "It's not just about what's inside," she said. "It's about the puzzle. Everything we found, its pieces. The carvings, the map, the ledger, the safe and the heater. None of it makes sense on its own. But together, it's a story. Someone left it here for someone else to finish." Elena studied the pages, her chest tight. The pencil lines were simple, but they carried meaning. Her daughter had copied everything with precision, almost reverence. "And you think we're the ones who are supposed to finish it?" she asked gently. Marisol didn't hesitate. "Yes, because no one else would care. Not the neighbors, not the people who came with money, not even our family. They just see trash or treasure. But we see the puzzle. And puzzles are meant to be solved." She leaned forward, her small hands pressing against the sketchbook. "You told me once that Dad used to fix broken radios, even when everyone else thought they were junk. He said things weren't junk if they still had pieces worth saving. This is the same. It's not junk. It's not trash. It's a puzzle, and it's ours." The word struck Elena deeper than she expected. She remembered those evenings, her late husband hunched over a table with wires and scraps, coaxing life from what others would have thrown away. She remembered telling herself that such patience was impractical, that it couldn't pay bills, but he had always said it mattered to notice what others missed. And now, staring at her daughter, she saw the same fire in her eyes. Marisol flipped another page, showing the sketch of the trapdoor beneath the trailer, the bolt sealed from the inside. He wanted to keep it safe, but he also wanted someone to find it. That's why he left codes in the ledger. That's why he hid the medallion. He wanted the right people to look and understand. If we walk away, the story ends here. But if we keep going, we finish what he started. Elena swallowed hard, her throat aching. And what if finishing it is dangerous? What if that's why he hid it in the first place? Marisol's expression softened, but her voice was still steady. "Then we're already in danger, Mom. People already know it's here. But we're not helpless. We know more than they think. We have the ledger, we have the medallion, and we have each other." She smiled faintly, as if trying to draw her mother out of the shadows of doubt. "Besides, if it really was just junk, why would they all be fighting so hard to take it from us?" Elena let out a long breath and closed her eyes. The child's logic was painfully simple and painfully true. This trailer, this rusted shell of metal and wood, had drawn too much attention to ever be dismissed as worthless. But it was Marisol's belief, the certainty in her small, steady voice, that cut to the fog of doubt. She reached across the counter and placed her hand over her daughter's. "You're right," she whispered. "It isn't trash. It's a puzzle, and maybe we're the only ones who see it that way." Marisol beamed, flipping back to her sketches with renewed energy, her pencil already scratching as she added arrows and connections between symbols. Elena watched her daughter work, the fear in her chest easing just slightly. Whatever lay ahead, whatever dangers or secrets the trailer still held, she would face them with Marisol, not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as a puzzle they had been chosen to solve together. For the first time since she'd bought it, Elena no longer saw the trailer as a gamble she had made out of desperation. She saw it as a message, unfinished and waiting, and her daughter, with her pencil and her stubborn faith, had become the voice that reminded her why they could not let it go. The night was heavy with stillness, as though the air itself held its breath. Elena and Marisol sat at the small counter, the ledger spread open between them, the brass medallion gleaming faintly in the lantern light. The safe hidden in the rusted water heater had been waiting for them since the moment they first discovered it, but until now, it had remained a mystery. They had unlocked the outer door, yes, but a second layer had greeted them, a panel etched with faint markings, strange notches circling its surface. Elena had closed it then, unwilling to guess. But tonight, with a medallion in her hands and Marisol's pages of sketches laid out in careful rows, she felt the pieces falling into place. Marisol pointed with her pencil at the ledger, her small voice sharp with excitement. "Look here, Mom. These symbols repeat in groups of 4. A star, then a triangle, then a spiral, then a number. It's not just a code for towns or dates. It's a sequence like a lock." Elena studied the lines, tracing the faint ink with her finger. She saw it now, patterns that looped across the margins, repeated on different pages, as if meant to be recognized only by someone patient enough to notice. And in the center of each set was always the same circle, divided into 4 quadrants. The compass rose, identical to the medallion, they had pulled from a hidden drawer beneath the sink. Her hands trembled as she lifted the medallion. its weight pressed cold against her palm. Around its edges were tiny grooves, barely visible unless you looked closely. They matched the notches carved into the panel inside the safe. The realization made her chest tighten. "It's a key," she whispered. "This isn't just decoration. It was built to fit." Marisol's eyes widened with triumph. "I told you, it's the center of everything." Together, they returned to the water heater. Elena pulled the hollow cylinder open once more, revealing the hidden safe door. The air inside was dry, stale with decades of secrecy. She knelt, pressing the medallion into the panel's grooves. It slid into place with unnerving precision, as though it had been waiting all these years for the single motion. "Now!" Elena murmured, her voice low. "The sequence." Marisol crouched beside her, clutching the ledger. She called out the symbols, her voice steady despite the tremor of her hands. "Left, triangle, 7. Right, spiral, 3. Left, star, 9. Elena turned the medallion like a dial, aligning it with each symbol etched faintly around the circle. With every turn came a faint click, the sound of gears moving after decades of silence. When the last symbol locked into place, there was a pause, a moment of suspended air. Then the mechanism gave a long, low groan, and the panel shuddered. With a final snap, the door swung inward. Inside lay a bundle of documents, carefully preserved in sealed envelopes, their edges still sharp despite the years. Elena lifted one out, her fingers trembling as she broke the wax seal. Within was a deed, signed and notarized, bearing the name of a company she recognized from headlines, an oil corporation that had grown into a global giant. Another envelope revealed stock certificates from railroads, airlines, and steel manufacturers, some of which had merged into the day's most powerful corporations. "These," Elena's voice faltered. She spread them across the floor, her breath shallow. "These aren't scraps. These are fortunes. They're histories that never made it into the books." Marisol knelt, her eyes wide. "It's everything the professor said. The Brotherhood didn't just hide money. They hid power. They hid the story of who really owned things. There were more than just financial papers. Tucked among the certificates were letters marked confidential, correspondence between men whose names were carved into the country's industrial history. Discussions of deals made off the record, of shipments rerouted in secret, of assets shifted quietly through networks that no government could trace. The trailer had been their vault, and these documents were the skeleton key to understanding how shadow empires had thrived in silence. Elena's hands shook as she gathered them back into a neat pile. She felt both awe and dread pressing against her chest. She understood now why strangers had come to her door with offers and threats, why her family had demanded she sell, why even Professor had spoken with caution. These papers weren't just valuable, they were dangerous. To hold them was to hold proof of a hidden chapter of America's past, and perhaps a fortune that could still bend the present. Marisol touched her mother's arm, her voice soft but certain. "See? It was a puzzle, and we solved it." Elena looked at her daughter, the girl's eyes bright in the lantern glow. For the first time since the auction, she felt something shift inside her, not just fear or doubt, but the quiet weight of destiny. They had opened the final mechanism. They had uncovered the Brotherhood's heart. And now, in the rusted belly of a trail the world had called trash, they held the keys to a story far larger than themselves. The first sign that word had spread came not from family this time, but from the street itself. Elena noticed a shift one morning when she stepped outside to hang clothes on the line. The usual muttered laughter and side comments that followed her since she dragged the trailer home were gone. Instead, the air was heavy with silence that wasn't quite natural. Curtains twitched. Neighbors stood a little too long at their mailboxes, pretending to sort envelopes while their eyes lingered on her yard. The same voices that once called her trailer junk metal on wheels now carried only whispers, low and uncertain, as though they weren't sure what they had witnessed or whether they dared to speak of it aloud. By midday, the quiet turned into a kind of vigil. Cars slowed when they passed. Small groups formed at the edges of lawns, neighbors shifting uncomfortably on their feet, their faces pale with the effort of pretending they weren't staring. They weren't mocking anymore. They were waiting. And then the vans arrived. Two of them pulled into the gravel drive, each bearing the seal of a university and the markings of a historical preservation team. Men and women in field jackets stepped out, their arms laden with cameras, notebooks, and equipment. Professor Kravitz was among them, his glasses glinting as he adjusted his satchel and greeted Elena with a nod that carried both apology and urgency. The neighbors drifted closer, as if drawn by a gravity they could not resist. Mrs. Calloway, the sharp-eyed woman who had first spoken to Brotherhood, was there, her cane planted firmly in the gravel as she leaned forward to catch every word. Even Mr. Harlan, the retired trucker who had once warned Elena to leave well enough alone, stood with arms crossed, his gaze locked on the experts as though confirming what he had always suspected. The preservationists moved with quiet efficiency. One photographed the carved symbols inside the trailer, his flash illuminating the spirals etched into the walls. Another measured the dimensions of the safe hidden inside the gutted water heater. A woman with gloved hands carefully cataloged the sealed envelopes, noting the condition of the wax, the faint imprints of stamps, the fragile signatures on the stock certificates. They murmured among themselves in hushed tones of astonishment, words like extraordinary and unprecedented slipping into the open air. The neighbors, clustered just beyond property line, said nothing. Their faces betrayed the shock of recognition. The rusted wreck they had mocked for months was now a site of historic interest, its secret spilling into the light under the hands of professionals. The disbelief etched across their faces was almost too sharp to look at. Marisol stood in the doorway, her sketchbook pressed against her chest. She watched as the experts copied down the same symbols she had traced for weeks, as if her drawings had suddenly come alive in the hands of strangers. She looked at her mother with quiet pride, and Elena felt her throat tighten. A hush fell over the street as one of the experts emerged from a trailer, holding a folder he had just cataloged. "These aren't just bonds," he explained to Professor Kravitz, though his voice carried far enough for the neighbors to hear. "They're original stock certificates, meticulously preserved. Some of these companies still exist under new names. If verified, the legal and financial implications could be staggering." The words rippled outward, passing to the gathered crowd like a shockwave. No one laughed. No one muttered. The silence deepened, heavy with awe and perhaps a touch of fear. Elena stood tall in the doorway, her daughter by her side, her eyes sweeping over the neighbors who had once ridiculed her. She saw them clearly now, the tight jaws, the downcast eyes, the awkward shuffling of feet. Disbelief had replaced scorn, and in its place was something closer to reverence. They hadn't just underestimated her. They had underestimated the story hidden in the walls of a rusted trailer. The experts worked into the evening, documenting, cataloging, and speaking in low tones of Brotherhood's place in post-war history. They spoke of smuggling networks, hidden economies, and the forgotten power of men who had operated in shadows. The trailer was no longer curiosity. It was evidence. As the sun dipped low and the lanterns inside the trailer flickered on, the neighbors began to disperse, their silence unbroken. No jeers followed, no whispered jokes. Only the sound of their footsteps fading down the road, leaving behind a street forever changed. Elena closed the door at last, leaning against it with a sigh. She looked at Marisol, whose eyes still burned with the certainty that had carried them this far. For the first time since the auction, Elena felt the weight of shame lift from her shoulders. The trailer was no longer a burden mocked by others. It was a discovery that had silenced them all. And in that silence, she and her daughter finally stood unshaken. The trailer stood in the fading light, its rusted panels glowing softly beneath the colors of dusk. For months, Elena had seen only its broken shell, the peeling paint, the sagging roof, the smell of mildew that clung stubbornly to its bones. To the neighbors, it had been an eyesore. To her family, a mistake. And even to herself at times, it felt like a desperate gamble, a last act of someone too stubborn to admit defeat. But now, as she leaned against its worn frame with Marisol by her side, Elena no longer saw a ruin. She saw a vessel that had carried more than metal and what could ever explain. Inside, the experts' notes and photographs still lingered on the counter, their careful handwriting documenting what had been pulled from the walls, the floors, the hidden compartments. stock certificates that outlived their companies, bonds tied to fortunes that had shifted the nation, letters that whispered of secret routes and clandestine trusts. Together, they painted a picture of a brotherhood that had existed in shadows, men who built their own empire beneath the ordinary highways of post-war America. And through chance, or perhaps through design, the legacy of that empire had ended up in her hands. Elena touched the edge of the ledger where it lay closed, the brass medallion resting on top of it. The objects no longer frightened her the way they once had. At first they had felt like burdens, dangerous pieces of a past she had no right to carry. But as she looked at Marisol's sketches pinned now along the trailer's wall, she understood. The past had been waiting for someone to listen, to notice the patterns instead of dismissing them. And her daughter, with her steady eyes and quiet persistence, had been that listener. "Do you think he meant for us to find it?" Marisol asked suddenly, her voice soft as she traced one of her own pencil spirals on the page. Elena smiled faintly. "I think whoever hid these things wanted them to survive. And somehow, we were the ones who cared enough not to look away." She thought back to the auction lot, the way the trailer had sat ignored, avoided, a husk no one believed was worth hauling home. She had spent her last $700 that day, mocked even as she signed the papers, told she was throwing her life into junk metal on wheels. Now she realized the truth. The rust had been a disguise, a skin that protected what was meant to endure. This trailer had been more than a shelter. It had been a guardian. The weight of her relative's scorn, of her neighbor's laughter, of her own fear seemed lighter now. The same voices that had pressed her to sell, to run, to give up, had been silenced by what lay hidden beneath the boards. And in their silence, Elena found strength. She had chosen to stay, to resist quick money and easy escape, and in doing so, she had preserved a story that might have vanished forever. Marisol leaned against her, her sketchbook still open in her lap. The child's drawings had become more than scribbles. They were a map of discovery, each page a record of what they had uncovered together. Elena brushed a hand through her daughter's hair and felt the certainty settle within her. This was their future, not in the sense of sudden riches or power, but in the knowledge that they had claimed something enduring. She looked around the trailer one last time as the lantern light flickered across its worn surfaces. The carved symbols, the false walls, the hidden compartments, all of it had seemed strange and frightening once. Now it was part of their story. The trailer no longer belonged to forgotten tycoons or syndicates of men long dead. It belonged to them, mother and daughter, who had seen past the rust to the history beneath. Elena exhaled slowly, a sense of peace filling her chest. "It was never junk," she whispered. "It was always more than that." Outside, the night deepened, and the trailer stood quietly, no longer mocked or dismissed. Within its fragile walls rested the pieces of a hidden history, and within Elena's resolve rested the future of her family. Rust had disguised it, neighbors had scorned it, strangers had tried to claim it, but in the end, the truth was clear. It had been a vessel all along, carrying a legacy through time until it reached the hands of those willing to guard it. And now, for Elena and Marisol, that legacy was no longer a secret. It was their beginning,